Chapter 1 began with the villainess laughing at the two people standing before her. She was Arachne, the first among the Demon King's Elite Four. Arachne made clear that she had no intention of letting the Demon King have the man in front of her, as she planned to make him her puppet instead. The man calmly informed his companion that since they were doing a speed run, there was no need to defeat this mid-boss. They would simply skip the fight by using a bug. His companion was visibly surprised by this. All of this was happening inside the game RTA Summit. It was being broadcasted live on a billboard in Tokyo just a few hours earlier. The commentator was full of excitement as the final moments arrived. The final glitch was being executed. The game character leaped into the air while the man behind the controller pressed the buttons rapidly. The game character defeated Arachne. The commentator announced that the final time was 25 minutes and 56 seconds. It was an incredible achievement, a new world record by a wide margin, set by the Speedrunning Emperor known as Shichiku Taiti. Shichiku Taiti held the world record for a game called Another Verse. RTA, or real-time attack, is a type of competition where a player starts a game from the very beginning and tries to clear it as fast as possible. It is commonly known as speedrunning. While skill play is always required, players also make use of glitches, which are bugs in the game that help save time. These include things like running on railings that characters normally cannot use, passing through walls, keeping the game running while the menu screen is displayed, or soft resetting the console to skip through cutscenes. The average time it normally takes to complete Another Verse is over 100 hours, making it an enormous and densely packed action RPG. The commentator could not believe that a game of that scale had just been cleared in 25 minutes. Taiti scratched his head and quietly acknowledged that he had done it. The commentator praised him further, noting that even the most difficult glitches had been pulled off without any risky moments. Taiti spoke into the microphone and expressed his gratitude. He thanked everyone who had cheered him on during his solo commentary practice streams, and he also thanked his fellow speedrunners who had exchanged ideas with him. The commentator then asked what Taiti planned to reward himself with once he returned home. Taiti's answer was that he had to go in for weekend work on his boss's orders right after the event. The commentator declared it a fitting end to the RTA Summit and thanked Taiti, saying he looked forward to seeing him again in the latter half of the year. Later, Taiti was sitting in front of his monitors, holding his controller again. He had been reading a comment that said he had missed the final glitch. He muttered to himself that even after practicing over 1,000 times, the success rate for that final glitch still could not reach 60 out of 30 attempts. He kept playing until there were only 30 seconds remaining, whispering to himself that he could do better. Even the early game wall clip, he felt, could have been smoother. He cursed under his breath and gripped his controller once more. His last thought before it happened was about sleep. Then suddenly, he fell into a dark, black dimension. He had no idea what was happening. A voice began to speak around him, calling out to the stars beyond Nirvana, to the goddess of the great land floating at the edge of the galaxy, transcending hundreds of years. The voice spoke of a moment when the celestial bodies would align and declared that the call of the goddess would be answered. It spoke of blessing a lost soul, crossing the great darkness, and guiding them over. In an instant, Taiti was thrown into another place entirely. When he opened his eyes, people around him were murmuring that the summoning had been a success. Taiti had no idea where he was. A woman stood before him, and behind her a crowd of people were declaring it a miracle. They said the great summoning, which only happens once every 100 years, had been completed thanks to the sky goddess. The woman instructed someone nearby to go and announce to the citizens of the capital that the summoning had succeeded. There were murmurs among the crowd about the hero not appearing particularly strong, and mentions that they had been fighting the Demon King for 5 years with the fate of the entire world hanging in the balance. The woman then addressed Taiti directly. She introduced herself as the kingdom's princess and the saintess of salvation, Ida. She explained that he had been summoned as the otherworldly hero through the great summoning ritual that occurs only once every 100 years, and she asked for his power. She told him that demons poured endlessly from the roots of evil, and that protecting those roots was the demon king known as Apocalypse, along with his 4 demon followers. She warned that if the roots of evil could not be sealed away, it was only a matter of time before the human world was destroyed. She knelt before him and asked him to lend his strength to defeat the Demon King. Taiti stood there in confusion, and then it slowly dawned on him. No matter how he looked at it, everything unfolding in front of him was the opening cutscene of Another Verse. It was the same familiar opening he had seen more times than he had seen his own parents' faces. He concluded that he must have played Another Verse so much that he was now dreaming he was actually inside it. Ida held up the holy sword before him, explaining that it was the sword that banished evil and had been passed down through the royal family for generations. Taiti found himself wondering why the game seemed to be in first person this time. He always played in third person because first person made emotion sick, and he could not recall changing any settings. He looked down at his hands and noticed that his limbs were moving exactly as they would in real life. He thought to himself, what an incredibly vivid dream. It was like being fully immersed inside the game. And then a thought struck him with full force. If he was going to be in such an extraordinary environment, he absolutely had to speedrun it. Ida was asking him to take the holy sword. But in that same moment, Taiti suddenly sprinted in the opposite direction. Soldiers were immediately ordered to stop him, but Taiti was already heading straight for the wall. To everyone's horror, he passed right through it. Ida stood in stunned disbelief as he vanished through the solid stone. As he ran, Taiti reminded himself of his plan. Step 1 was to ignore the holy sword entirely and escape from the castle using a wall clip. Taiti kept up his habit of commentating to himself as if he were streaming, even though he was completely alone. He reminded himself that the holy sword was not needed to defeat the bosses, and that skipping the tutorial, including the one on how to use the holy sword, was the most important thing to do first. Back at the castle, Ida was still calling after Taiti, urging him to come back and take the holy sword. She then received instructions to go out and search for the hero herself. She performed a series of hand gestures, and in an instant she disappeared. She had transformed into her civilian disguise, an ordinary-looking girl named Danya. Taiti, meanwhile, had already reached the capital city of Falschla. He came to a brief stop. A member of the capital's adventurer guild, a friendly and talkative young man named Jian, noticed the unfamiliar face and sized Taiti up as someone new to the city. Jian offered to show him around and help him get familiar with the place. But before Jian could say much more, Taiti leaped right over him and muttered that he had no interest and kept running without looking back. Jian was left standing there in stunned surprise. As he ran, Taiti explained the situation to himself in his commentator voice. What had just happened was the hardest part of the early game, known among speedrunners as the Jian skip. Jian was a meddlesome character who, if given a chance, would trigger a long town guiding tutorial that was impossible to avoid once it started. However, by performing a jump step with very precise timing, a player could leap over him and skip the entire thing. The timing for this was notoriously difficult, and many new speedrunners found themselves stuck at this exact point. Among regular players, Jian was actually a well-loved and brotherly character, but in a speedrun, getting caught by him meant losing at least 4 minutes, which was an unacceptable cost. Meanwhile, Danya had been chasing after Taiti and happened to spot Jian along the way. She asked him if he had seen a young man come running out of the castle. Jian pointed her toward the north gate. As she ran in that direction, Danya turned the situation over in her mind with growing worry. The hero had left without the holy sword and was completely unarmed. They had waited a full 100 years for this summoning, and now the hero was running around unequipped. If he died out there, it would be a disaster. Behind her, Jian called out to her in a tearful voice, saying it was the first time in his life someone had ignored him so completely and rudely, treating him like an unwanted door-to-door salesman. Danya apologized briefly, but pressed on ahead without stopping. Taiti arrived at the entrance of the first dungeon and announced the time to himself. It was 5 minutes and 2 seconds. The dungeon before him was called the Forest of the Dead, a place crawling with undead creatures. Danya had managed to catch up to him at this point, but she was immediately met with a shocking sight. Taiti had stripped off all of his clothes and was standing in nothing but his undergarments. Her face went red. She thought the hero had absolutely no shame. Taiti calmly picked up a wooden stick from the ground. Then he announced that his next move was to run straight into the herd of undead enemies. Danya could not believe what she was hearing. The hero was standing there with a single stick, wearing almost nothing, and was planning to charge directly into a swarm of monsters. Before she could stop him, an undead creature attacked from behind and bit into his shoulder. More of them quickly swarmed around him. Danya panicked, watching in alarm as he just kept taking hit after hit. It looked like pure suicide to her. She could barely stand to watch. But then, to her complete surprise, Taiti began beating the undead back with the stick, one after another, until every single one of them had been defeated. He muttered to himself that he had taken enough intentional damage, and that from this point on he would rush through the rest of the section without getting hit at all. He took off running again, and Danya scrambled to follow him. She introduced herself as Danya, a messenger sent by Ida, and told him that he had left the holy sword behind. She also warned him that his wounds were serious enough to kill him, and that she needed to cast healing magic on him right away. Taiti glanced at her briefly without slowing down and said that they could still make it in time. Danya did not understand what he meant, so Taiti explained it to himself as he ran. The current run was being played on easy mode. In easy mode, the early game had a special balancing mechanic where the less health the player had while racing through the Forest of the Dead, the weaker the enemies would become, including the bosses further ahead. This meant that in a speedrun, getting hit as much as possible in that section was actually the correct strategy. The reason he needed to be nearly naked was because wearing a shirt and pants would raise his defense stat, which would reduce the damage he took and ruin the mechanic entirely. Danya's voice rang out behind him, insisting loudly that she was going to heal him no matter what. In his mind, Tai labeled her with a nickname, the "Will Definitely Heal You monster." He knew her well as a friendly ally character to the protagonist in the game, and under normal circumstances, she served as a helpful mascot companion. But right now, she was a direct obstacle to the run, and he needed to exit the forest at full speed before she could cast anything on him. Danya kept shouting after him, determined to heal him whether he liked it or not. At 9 minutes and 43 seconds, Tai arrived at a castle. Danya caught up to him, completely out of breath, and finally managed to cast her healing magic on him. He thanked her while she healed him. Danya then pleaded with him to equip himself properly before going any further. She told him that one of the Demon King's Elite Four was inside that castle, the puppet user Arachne, and warned that going in without equipment would be certain death. But before she could even finish her warning, Tai had already broken into a run again and disappeared ahead. As he ran, something caught Tai's attention. Danya's line of dialogue had been slightly different for what he remembered. He wondered briefly if it was because this was a dream, then suddenly his eyes went wide. A spider monster was blocking the path in front of him. Danya recognized it immediately as one of Arachne's familiars and cried out that there was absolutely no way he could fight it in his current state, wearing almost nothing. She told him to run, but he was already fighting it before she finished her sentence. His eyes were completely focused and calm. He beat the monster down with his wooden stick. Danya stared in disbelief, unable to accept that he was actually hitting a monster with a piece of wood. Her disbelief only deepened when he defeated it entirely. Tai explained to himself what had just happened. This was a technique called the Strange Rod Glitch. By hitting a specific mini-boss repeatedly at certain precise points with a wooden stick, the weapon's attack value glitched out and became permanently multiplied to 1024. By comparison, the Holy Sword's attack value was only 60, which made it essentially useless next to the stick. He added a cautionary note that because the wooden stick was such a broken item, there was a real possibility it could be patched out in future game updates, so it was something to keep an eye on. Danya stood behind him with her mind completely blank, no longer able to make sense of anything that was happening. Tai noted that defeating the mini-boss had also yielded a clean item drop, a red potion that granted a strengthening buff. He considered himself lucky since the item drop at that point was subject to random chance and could just as easily have been something useless. With that taken care of, he declared it was time to head into the mid-boss dungeon, Arachne's castle. The moment he stepped inside, Arachne's laughter filled the space. She recognized him as the otherworld hero and made clear that she wanted him for herself. She mused that humans from another world might make far better puppets than the one she had been working with in this world. She declared that she would not share him with the Demon King, because Tai was going to become her puppet. At 12 minutes and 48 seconds, Tai announced that he would be skipping the mid-boss fight using a bug. Danya's jaw dropped as he walked straight through the wall and vanished from the room entirely. Danya and Arachne were left facing each other. Arachne's eyes fixed on Danya with a cold, sharp stare, and Danya felt a wave of genuine terror wash over her. Arachne demanded to know where Tai had gone. One of the undead nearby answered that he had gone through the wall. Arachne already knew that, and she snapped at the undead, calling them defective, before ordering them all to spread out and find Tai. She made it absolutely clear that the otherworld hero belonged to her. Danya crept toward the wall where Tai had disappeared, pressing at it and guessing that it must have been somewhere around that spot. Danya pressed her hand against the wall and passed right through it, following after Tai. At 13 minutes and 10 seconds, Tai was running and talking to himself about how the strengthened wooden stick he now carried was the most powerful weapon available to him. With it, he could completely ignore the remaining 3 members of the Demon King's Elite Four and head straight to the final fight. Behind the wall was an extraordinary warp glitch. By jumping off a specific cliff, the game would send him directly to the deepest part of the final boss dungeon. He reflected with genuine admiration that this game, as great as it was, had some wonderfully broken things about it. Under normal circumstances, that particular cliff had a fall death detection zone that would instantly kill any player who went over the edge. However, there was one very specific point along the cliff where that detection simply did not function. Danya came up beside him and tried to get through to him. She reminded him that he was supposed to be the otherworld hero, the one destined to defeat the Demon King, and she pleaded with him to take that responsibility seriously and save the world the right way. Tai paid her no attention and kept moving, reasoning to himself that clearing the game did not require fighting any of the mid-bosses. In any speedrun, the absolute rule was to minimize time loss at every possible opportunity. That was precisely why he intended to be the fastest person to ever defeat the Demon King. Tears gathered in Danya's eyes as she listened to words she could not fully understand. Taiti announced that he had reached the target point and that he was now about to enter the final boss fight. He jumped off the cliff. Danya stared down into the dark drop below. She stood there hesitating, clearly frightened, but then she shut her eyes tightly and jumped after him. At 14 minutes and 25 seconds, on the way down through the darkness, Taiti used the buff potion he had picked up earlier. He noted to himself that it did not taste pleasant. He reviewed his progress so far and felt that things had been going well. He had pulled off the Gian skip and had gotten the strange rod glitch quickly. He also found himself thinking, somewhat unexpectedly, that the first-person perspective he normally disliked was actually working out better than he had anticipated. The sense of immersion was not bad at all. He had even found himself trying to look composed in front of the NPC Danya, which made him pause. He then remembered that the line of dialogue she had spoken earlier was not in the original game. That was strange. He began wondering whether he could push the time even further. But then he reminded himself that this was a dream, and that measuring time in a dream was pointless since it would not count in reality. He thought briefly about a VR kit he was fairly sure he owned somewhere. The next day was also his compensatory day off from all the overtime he had worked. When he woke up, he told himself he would speedrun properly. Faster than anyone. Faster than even his own previous best. With that thought firmly in his mind, he made a promise to himself that when he faced the Demon King, he would not make a single mistake. At 15 minutes and 30 seconds, he landed in front of the enemy. The final boss spoke with menace, declaring that the otherworld hero was an arrogant and lowly human who would now accept its purge. Taiti moved straight toward its head to cut the dialogue short. The early portion of the final boss fight had no special techniques involved. He focused on dodging the tentacle attacks and landed 3 hits with his buffed strange rod. The final boss was extremely powerful, and since Taiti had maximized his attack stat at the cost of all his health, a single hit from the enemy would kill him instantly. The only option was to not get hit at all. Watching from nearby, Danya was overwhelmed. In only about 30 minutes since the moment this young man had come bolting out of the castle without even a proper weapon, he was now completely dominating the Demon King. As she watched him run and dodge with total precision, she became more and more convinced in her heart that this truly was the one summoned from another world. This was the power of the hero. Taiti landed his 3rd hit. At 22 minutes and 12 seconds, the Demon King let out a furious curse. Danya felt a surge of relief and joy, believing it was over. But Taiti immediately told her that the second phase was just beginning. He added, more to himself than to her, that the first phase was actually the harder of the two. In the second phase, after the enemy fired a beam or swung its tentacles 4 times, there would be a moment when the head core was exposed and vulnerable. Hitting it at that exact moment would end the fight. Under a normal strategy, the rest was simply a matter of executing the plan cleanly. Danya could not make heads or tails of what he was explaining. He continued, telling himself that this was a speedrun, and that meant using the most difficult glitch he had ever developed, something he had come to call the Shichika step. It was a glitch he himself had discovered. He had failed to pull it off at the live event. The memory of the comments he had read afterward came back to him briefly. He turned his attention to the enemy and noted that the cutscene was about to end. This particular cutscene could not be skipped. The Demon King's attack patterns in the phase that followed were entirely random, which meant whether or not he could even attempt the glitch depended completely on luck. He asked for prayers. Danya had no idea what he meant, but in speedrunning culture, asking for prayers was a well-known way of asking fans to send their cheers and good energy during moments that depended on random chance or extremely difficult techniques. The Demon King attacked again with another curse. Taiti dodged it. In his mind, he processed the pattern quickly. The first attack had been vertical, which was what he had expected. If the next attack came out as a horizontal one, he would have the ideal setup for the fastest possible Shichika step. The enemy fired. Taiti cursed under his breath when he saw the result. It was a bad pattern. The Demon King used its claws, and then unexpectedly shifted into the horizontal attack pattern. Taiti's eyes briefly moved toward Danya. He found himself wondering in the back of his mind whether having Danya pray for him had somehow influenced the attack patterns. It was something he wanted to look into and report to his Anverse research group when he woke up. For now, he kept running. He could still work with the situation as it was. At 24 minutes and 32 seconds, Taiti had climbed upward. Danya had been praying with her eyes closed, and when she opened them, she was stunned to see Taiti running directly along the surface of the wall. The polygon geometry on the ivy growing there was glitched in a way that allowed a player to run along it, as though it were solid flat ground. Now came the hardest part. He needed to land on an incredibly small piece of falling debris, a target so tiny it was only a few pixels wide. He had to match the angle and timing with frame-perfect precision. Then he would go for the head core. At 24 minutes and 42 seconds, Taiti was positioned above the roots, calculating every detail of his next move. The Demon King let out a furious cry. Taiti launched himself upward and jumped toward the enemy. He executed the Shichiku step. At 24 minutes and 53 seconds, Taiti raised his wooden stick above his head and brought it crashing down onto the monster's core. The Demon King roared that it would not forgive him and declared a curse upon the otherworld hero. Danya stood in silence, completely overwhelmed. No words came to her at first. Then she gathered herself and told Taiti that he had admirably completed the mission given to him, and she began to introduce herself properly. In Taiti's mind, the ending was beginning to play out just as he remembered it. Danya's true identity was Princess Ida. After returning to her true form, Ida would seal away the roots of evil that the Demon King had been protecting and bring lasting peace to the world. He reflected with satisfaction that he had just completed a full any % speedrun of another verse on easy mode. He had gotten a personal best in the 24-minute range, and the Shichiku step had worked. He was fairly confident this was now the fastest run on the leaderboard, which made it a genuinely good run. Still, he found himself thinking that he might have been able to save a little more time around the Strange Rod section. And depending on what the Danya interaction today revealed in terms of new techniques, there might be room to go even faster. But then something caught his attention. The ending sequence was taking unusually long to start. He noticed it and found it odd. And then Danya said something that stopped him cold. She said she could not return to her previous form. Taiti was caught off guard. Danya struggled to explain, mentioning something about Ida's power. If she could not transform back into Ida, the ending sequence would never begin. Even though the Demon King had been defeated, something was wrong. She trailed off without finishing her sentence. The thought that formed in Taiti's mind in that moment was a heavy one. Even though he had beaten the final boss, the game had not ended. The possibility settled over him slowly and with great weight. He might be stuck inside the world of another verse, with no way to return home. Chapter 2 opened in the capital city of Falschla. Danya had gone to visit a tailor shop, and the tailor greeted her warmly and asked what kind of skirt she was looking for. Danya clarified that she was not there for herself. At that moment, Taiti came crashing through the wall of the shop and greeted everyone inside. The tailor was absolutely terrified. Later that day, the two of them sat down for a meal together. Taiti was now properly dressed in an adventurous shirt, pants, and boots, each piece giving him a small boost of 5 defense points. Danya told him firmly that he needed to stop doing such shocking and attention-grabbing things inside the capital. Taiti responded as though he genuinely did not understand what the problem was, insisting that what he had done was completely normal behavior. Danya called him out on that immediately. He insisted he was being serious. Danya glanced around the room to make sure no one was watching, then made a small gesture with her hand. A subtle barrier went up around them so that no one nearby could overhear their conversation. Taiti turned the events of the day over in his mind. The unexpected situation of the game not ending properly had caught him completely off guard, so he had made his way back to the starting area to take stock of everything and figure out what was going on. He explained to Danya that the wall entrance at the tailor shop had not been intentional misbehavior. It was a known side effect of using certain glitches during a playthrough. When a player completed the game using save data that had been created through glitches, it caused a bug where some buildings could no longer be entered through their normal doors. He believed there was even a report about this in his Anverse research group. As far as he was concerned, entering through the wall instead was simply the practical workaround, and it caused no real issues. Danya did not share his calm view of the matter. She expressed that it was genuinely shocking and called the whole thing completely outrageous, referring to the glitch behavior. Taiti did not respond to that. In his own mind, he was thinking through how to explain the situation to her. Danya was a character who existed inside the game called Another Verse, and he was someone who knew that game extremely well. Explaining his perspective to her would not cause any harm, but he was not sure how well she would be able to understand it. Danya admitted that what he was telling her was very hard to take at face value. However, she also could not deny the things she had seen with her own eyes. She had observed closely, and while the things Taiti did resembled magic on the surface, she could detect no magical energy being used and no spiritual blessing involved. It was clearly operating outside the rules and logic of the world she knew. The only way she could describe it was as some kind of power that came from outside this world entirely. She then raised a possibility that had been forming in her mind. Perhaps the reason she could not return to being Ida was because Taiti had used glitches to defeat the Demon King. Taiti was genuinely surprised by how sharp her thinking was. He admitted that at the time he had truly believed he was in a dream, and explained that he had heard before that using glitches to defeat the Demon King could potentially bug out the ending sequence. However, in the thousands of times he had run through this game, he had never once encountered a bug where Ida was unable to revert to her true form. The glitches he regularly used during his runs had never caused anything like that before. The door entrance bug was something he had fully expected as a possible side effect, but the Ida bug was something completely outside anything he had ever seen or anticipated. Because of that, he was fairly confident he was not the cause of this particular problem. Danya looked visibly unsettled by everything he was saying. She pointed out, with painful clarity, that if what Tai Ti was saying was accurate, then not only was she stuck unable to return to being Ida, but any solution to that problem would also fall outside what he knew or could predict. Tai Ti acknowledged silently that she had understood the situation exactly right. He told her that he did have one idea. There was something called the true ending. Defeating only the Demon King would result in the normal ending, but there was a path to something more. Danya noted with some bewilderment that the normal ending had already gone completely haywire because of the glitches. Tai Ti agreed that was true. However, he explained that by defeating all 4 of the Demon King's elite members and fulfilling certain special conditions, it was possible to reach the true ending instead. He went on to give a rough explanation of how it worked from a technical standpoint. Reaching the true ending would require the game to generate a second loop of data, and when that ending sequence began, all variables in the game's programming would be reset and initialized back to their original states. This process would effectively wipe out any effects caused by glitches, including the one affecting Danya. Danya's head was spinning from the unfamiliar words like programming, variables, and initialize. Tai Ti summed it up in simpler terms. Reaching the true ending would erase the bugs, and Danya would be able to properly return to being Ida. Then he paused and asked the question that had been weighing on him. He wanted to know whether, if Danya became Ida again, he would actually be able to return to his own world. Danya answered that once she had her power back as Ida, she would be able to use the same time-crossing magic that had been used to summon him in the first place. As long as there was a connection between him and his original world, she was confident he would always be able to return to it. His hands trembled slightly. Danya noticed. She told him quietly that it had been wrong of them to pull him into their world to begin with. Being suddenly summoned to a completely unfamiliar place was not something he had chosen, and she was in no position to criticize anything he had done since arriving. She apologized to him sincerely and from the bottom of her heart. Tai Ti told her not to worry about it. He said honestly that he genuinely loved the world of another verse. But the truth was that work had been piling up back home, and he also wanted to get back to improving the world record run with his fellow speedrunners. He needed to return as soon as he could. He added that even though he could not be sure whether any of this was real or still a dream, being in this world had actually made him happy in a way he had not expected. Danya looked at him quietly. He paused for a moment and then admitted something else. Sitting still like this, without running, without moving forward through the game, made him deeply uncomfortable. He could not settle down. He explained that aside from his very first 10 playthroughs of another verse, every single time he had entered this world had been as a speedrunner. Staying idle inside, it felt fundamentally wrong to him, like something was off. Even just sitting here talking felt uneasy, because some part of his mind kept feeling as though a timer was still running somewhere. Danya stared at his expression as he said all of this, and then screwed up her face and told him flatly that he was a pervert. When they stepped outside, Danya announced that their next destination was the Adventurers Guild. Given the unusual nature of their situation, she said they needed to gather information and get a clear picture of their surroundings before making any further moves. Her familiar speech patterns and mannerisms were fully back at this point. She explained that the Capital's Guild collected information from every corner of the continent, which meant that if anything significant had happened anywhere, they would almost certainly know about it there. Tai Ti looked up at the sky, noticing something strange happening above. Danya told him to keep quiet about everything he had accomplished so far and not to tell anyone yet. She pointed to the dark, swirling mass visible in the clouds and explained that it was the root of evil that the Demon King had been protecting. All monsters were born from that source, and they went on to attack humans as living embodiments of evil. Even with the Demon King defeated, without Ida's true form restored, there was no one who could seal the roots of evil away. The threat of monsters had not gone away, simply because the Demon King was dead. Until true peace was fully secured, they could not allow the people to grow careless or let their guard down. Tai Ti listened and acknowledged that this was exactly what the in-game salvation quest had described. He understood the situation. His attention then shifted as he noticed something nearby. He spotted an item shop and asked Danya if he could make a quick stop there. She agreed without much thought. Tai Ti immediately broke into a run toward the shop, but since the door entrance bug was still affecting him, he went straight through the wall instead of using the door. Danya told him firmly to stop doing that. A little while later, the two of them were walking through the city together. Tai Ti took in the scenery around him and was struck by how vivid and detailed everything looked, as though he were seeing the world of another verse rendered in ultra-high resolution. It really was sinking in that he was actually inside the game. At the same time, something else had been quietly bothering him. Danya was far too sharp. It was too late to take back anything he had said, but looking back on the conversation earlier where he had talked openly about all the meta-level concepts behind the game, it was unsettling how easily and naturally she had been able to follow along and understand things that should have been completely foreign to her. Her way of thinking and speaking was far too flexible and adaptive for a standard NPC. Even the most advanced artificial intelligence technology available would have struggled to meet that level of responsiveness, and it was well beyond what the specifications of another verse should have required or supported. He had stated his goal of reaching the true ending, but the big assumption underlying that entire plan was that this world was running on the same programming logic as the game. He found himself genuinely uncertain now about whether that assumption held true. He was not sure this world actually was the game. His thoughts were broken by a sudden loud sound. Danya looked up with wide, alarmed eyes. The noise was the warning horn of the Capitol Guards. A guard riding a griffin high up in the air called out that a monster was approaching. A wyvern, one that had been corrupted by magical erosion, had broken through the city's barrier. The guard instructed everyone on the ground to evacuate to somewhere safe immediately. Danya stared up at the sky, and her eyes went wide with alarm. A wyvern had actually flown into the capital. Before she could fully process that, a massive explosion went off somewhere nearby. She spun around in confusion and looked at Taiti. He was holding a slingshot. It was a completely ordinary slingshot, paired with some firecrackers. He said the slingshot he had just bought at the shop was already proving useful. Danya had no idea what she was looking at. Taiti assured her it would be an easy victory. He explained his reasoning. This was a fixed event that always triggered the second time a player entered the capital. In his mind, he confirmed that he had just cleared the main quest segment involving a flying dragon attacking the town. He had done extensive challenge playthroughs of another verse before he ever started speedrunning it, the kind where he conquered every dungeon, collected every piece of equipment, and tracked down every item in the game. It had been genuinely fun, and as a result he had memorized every fixed event alongside every main and side quest in the entire game. Danya stood nearby with a completely blank look on her face. Taiti continued explaining. This particular battle event was triggered by walking into the specific square they were in, because the wyvern spawn position was fixed and never changed. There was a brief window of time just before the wyvern began its attack animation, and if a player could land a projectile hit during that gap, the creature would be instantly defeated. Danya asked with genuine disbelief whether a completely ordinary slingshot was really enough to do that. Taiti responded enthusiastically that it was a great question. What he had used was a technique called rapid-fire shot. The moment after firing the slingshot, by instantly switching to a one-handed weapon, the firing animation could be cancelled, allowing the slingshot to be fired again immediately at an extremely high speed. He began physically demonstrating the rapid hand movements he had used just moments earlier. Danya told him to stop vibrating like that, and added that he needed to stop using glitches so openly in a public place. Taiti explained that he had simply figured it was better to take the wyvern down quickly before it could cause any damage to anyone. He apologized. Danya conceded that the reasoning was fair enough. By that point, people in the area had started looking over at them. Voices began rising from the gathering crowd. One man nearby asked what those strange movements had been. A girl nearby remarked that watching him vibrate like that was deeply unsettling. Someone else pointed out that the way he moved did not look human at all and wondered aloud where he had even come from, calling for someone from the guild to come and take a look. Another voice in the crowd, seemingly unconcerned with the situation, commented that at least he had a nice face. Someone nearby responded with exasperation at that remark given the circumstances. Then a man near the back spoke up and said he recognized Taiti as the same person who had come through the wall of his shop earlier. A woman nearby asked what he meant. The man explained that Taiti had suddenly appeared inside his shop wearing almost nothing but underwear, had greeted him normally, paid for some clothes, and left. Someone else in the crowd muttered that the whole situation was getting very hard to follow. A man in the crowd suddenly stepped forward and pointed a mop threateningly at Taiti, accusing him of being a spy for the demons. Danya immediately moved to stand between them, telling the man firmly that he was wrong and urging everyone to calm down. Another man from the crowd pushed back, demanding to know how anyone was supposed to stay calm. He suggested that the wyvern attack itself must have been an inside job orchestrated by Taiti, pointing out that no ordinary human moved the way he did. Danya had already anticipated that this kind of suspicion would arise. It was all a consequence of Taiti using glitches so openly in front of everyone. Then a voice cut through the noise and told everyone to stop. A hooded figure stepped forward from the crowd and reminded the people gathered there that word had come from the castle just the other day about Ida summoning a hero from another world for the first time in 100 years, someone with a strength that went beyond ordinary human understanding. The hooded figure turned toward Taiti and asked if he was that otherworld hero, then firmly stated that this man was absolutely not a demon. Taiti was taken aback. The hooded figure explained how she knew. She said she could recognize a demon when she saw one, and the reason for that went back to something deeply painful. Her hometown had been taken over by demons. Her younger sister had been killed by a monster right in front of her eyes. She herself had her face burned when she was still just a young girl. She explained that the trauma and suffering she had endured back then had awakened within her a particular ability, one that allowed her to sense and distinguish demons from humans. And Taiti, she said, carried none of the cruel and dark aura that demons had. The hooded figure reached out and took Taitai's hand in hers. She told him that she had been waiting for someone like him for a very long time. She said she did not want to live in fear anymore, and she asked him with all the sincerity she had to give him a world free from monsters. Taiti was completely speechless. Danya stood nearby, watching the two of them in silence. Later that day, as the townspeople went on their way, several of them reminded Taiti one more time not to vibrate like that in public again. In Taitai's mind, he reflected that most of the middle part of that scene had played out differently from what he remembered, but the old woman's wish had followed the scenario closely enough. Danya then told him more about the hooded woman's background. Her village had been seized 50 years ago by Arachne, the first of the Demon King's elite four. By all accounts, it had been a horrific massacre. Because the village was still under Arachne's control, the full extent of the casualties could only be guessed at. Taiti turned this over quietly in his mind. The old woman's story was definitely part of another verse's established lore. But experiencing it from inside the world, rather than watching it play out on a screen, was something else entirely. It was far more painful and real than he had ever felt while playing through that scene before, and he found that he genuinely could not think of a single thing to say, even though it was a moment he had seen many times. Danya added that there were many people across the continent living in similar circumstances. As long as the roots of evil remained unsealed, that number would only continue to grow. She then went quiet for a moment before speaking again. She told Taiti that he had already done his part and defeated the Demon King, but that she herself had still not fulfilled her own role. She could not even do what she was supposed to do when it mattered most. She said it with a quiet bitterness, questioning what her title of Saintess of Salvation even meant anymore. Taiti looked at her and told her honestly that she had been saving him. He was speaking from his experience with the game, but the truth of it applied here too. Danya was always following, just behind the hero, always present. There had been moments, like when he was navigating something that felt as dark and unsettling as a horror game dungeon, where the fear had genuinely crept in. But reminding himself that Danya was always there with him had made it much easier to push through. Even now, in this uncertain and strange situation he found himself in, he was able to stay calm because she was beside him. And beyond all of that, he told her plainly, he was a genuine fan of hers. He loved Danya very much. Danya's face went red. Taiti continued, pointing out that in the official fan popularity polls, Danya had always held an unshakable first-place ranking. He noted that since Ida sat at 8th place, there was simply no way anyone could claim Danya had less value than Ida. Danya processed the part about the popularity poll, and then it suddenly hit her what he had just said about Ida being ranked 8th. She stared at him with a complicated expression. Taiti moved the conversation along, saying that based on everything he had been able to do since arriving, all the glitches he had pulled off were working exactly the same way they did in the game. That meant this world had to be operating on the same underlying programming as another verse. Danya stared at him and asked, with some wariness, whether he was saying he would not abuse that knowledge carelessly. Taiti simply reassured her that she would definitely be able to return to being Ida. He was confident they could reach the true ending and save the world together. Danya then asked about a particular way he had referred to her, using a familiar and affectionate suffix. Taiti explained that it was just a conversational habit common among people in his community of fans and enthusiasts. Danya did not seem to know what to make of that. Meanwhile, over at the Adventurers Guild known as Ada's Shield, a commotion was breaking out. One adventurer was staring at a report in his hands with complete disbelief. According to the paper, the Wyvern attack had resulted in 0 human casualties. He was shocked enough by that. But what made it even harder to accept was that there had also been 0 material damage whatsoever to the city. He demanded to know whether the person who had written the report had been doing their job properly. The other adventurer confirmed that the report was genuine and accurate, and started to mention something about a self-proclaimed otherworld hero being involved. But before he could finish a sentence, a woman's voice filled the room as she walked in asking what all the commotion was about. It was the guild master. Chapter 3 opened inside the Capital Adventurers Guild, Ida's Shield. Jin, the guild member Taiti had leaped over the day before, was waiting for him with a bold and confrontational energy. He made it clear that he found it quite audacious of Taiti to show his face at the guild after the way he had been ignored so completely the previous day. He made it known that he expected Taiti to be ready for whatever came next. However, when Jian actually looked at Tai Tai's face, he was caught off guard. Tai Tai was wearing a deeply troubled and uncomfortable expression. Jian found it strange that he himself was somehow the one feeling fine while the other person looked so miserable. Tai Tai bowed his head and apologized sincerely. He told Jian that Jian had done nothing wrong, and that what had happened was more like an involuntary physical reaction on his part. He explained that simply seeing Jian's face caused memories of his past failures to flash through his mind all at once. In his thoughts, Tai Tai was reliving the harsh criticism he had received from viewers every time he had failed to pull off the Jian skip during his streams. Jian picked up on the mention of past mistakes and asked about them with genuine curiosity. Tai Tai quickly dismissed it, saying it was something completely unrelated and asking Jian to forget he had said anything. But Jian, in his own mind, was reading the situation in an entirely different and much more dramatic way. Looking at Tai Tai's pained expression, Jian became convinced that Tai Tai must be haunted by some terrible memory. Perhaps someone important to him had been attacked by monsters right before his eyes. Jian even began to wonder whether his own face resembled someone from Tai Tai's past, maybe a brother, and whether Tai Tai carried guilt over not having been strong enough to protect that person. Moved by his own interpretation of the situation, Jian apologized to Tai Tai and told him not to be so hard on himself. Without knowing the details, Jian warmly offered to be like an older brother to Tai Tai from that point on. Tai Tai thanked him with a bewildered expression, having no idea what had prompted any of that. Danya, standing nearby, had a strong feeling that something had been completely misunderstood between the two of them, but she quietly decided to leave it alone. She steered the conversation toward the reason they had come, telling Jian that she needed to speak with the guild master. Jian informed her that the guild master was currently out at the royal castle. He mentioned that the guild master appeared to be there to request permission to pursue the Demon King's Elite Four, especially given the recent news about the Otherworld hero. Jian expressed his own curiosity about what the hero was like. Tai Tai kept his thoughts to himself, aware that Jian had no idea he was standing right next to that very person. Jian then shifted his attention and asked whether Tai Tai was planning to register with the guild. Tai Tai confirmed that he needed to. Jian declared it perfect timing and welcomed him warmly to Ida's shield. Shortly after, the guild receptionist, a young woman named Mir One, greeted them and began explaining the guild to Tai Tai. She introduced Ida's shield as the Adventurers Guild of the capital city of Falshla, and noted that while adventurers guilds existed in every city across the kingdom, Ida's shield served as the central administrator overseeing all of them. She showed Tai Tai the guild administration badge and explained that possessing it would allow him to take on quests in any city, not just the capital. By completing quests, he could raise his rank starting from the lowest level, F, all the way up to S, and higher-ranked adventurers could take on increasingly difficult quests. She noted that under normal circumstances registration required passing an exam, but that Tai Tai was being exempted from it based on Danya's recommendation. Jian chimed in that Tai Tai was getting quite lucky, as the exam was notoriously difficult. He went on to explain that the guild, true to its name, had the full backing of Ida the Queen, which gave it outstanding credibility throughout the kingdom. He added that holding a registration badge from Ida's shield also functioned as a free pass through customs checkpoints at any city gate. Tai Tai remarked quietly that it was impressive. In his own mind, however, he already knew every detail of this, having read it all in the official game guide, which had cost him 8,600 Japanese yen. Jian continued talking, noting that the quality of life within the guild was good, with quest rewards being relatively generous compared to other guilds. He then mentioned what he clearly considered the greatest benefit of all. Once a year, Ida herself would come to the guild in person to encourage the members. He admitted there were people who had joined specifically because of her, and that he himself wanted to get closer to someone with such a goddess-like beauty. Danya's face quietly went red. Tai Tai leaned toward her and whispered, asking if she had heard what Jian just said. Danya composed herself and responded that since Ida's shield essentially served as the capital's vigilante corps, it was only appropriate that the rewards and attention it received reflected that importance. Mir One, meanwhile, was looking at Jian with a deeply unimpressed expression. She stated flatly that there was no way Ida would ever be a suitable match for someone like him. She reminded him that they were in the middle of registering a new member and hit him with a book to stop him from interrupting. Jian complained that Mir One was always so quick to resort to physical force. Mir One shot back that it was entirely his own fault. Watching this exchange unfold, Tai Tai found himself genuinely delighted. The way the game characters were interacting with each other felt far more vivid and real than anything he had experienced through screen. He found himself wondering with quiet glee whether it was alright to just sit back and enjoy it like this. He had always known that another verse had an unusually elaborate and detailed set of character backgrounds and NPC personalities, almost to an abnormal degree. That level of care and attention to detail was exactly what made the world feel so alive and immersive. Even the side quests available at the guild had always felt less like tasks to complete and more like natural extensions of the world itself. From a pure gameplay perspective, the depth was also outstanding. He thought about Mir 1 specifically, recalling details he had read in the free fan book published by the Emperor study group. She was a guild receptionist NPC who could not be recruited into the player's party, but came with a long and detailed list of characteristics and background information. The whole thing made him practically shiver with excitement, even as another part of him was still itching to speedrun. He concluded, looking at all the characters around him, that another verse was simply too much fun to rush through without taking any of it in. Mir 1 instructed Taiti to place his hand over a crystallization device used for registration. He did so, and a hologram-like light appeared above it. Mir 1 looked at the display and read out that his name was Shichiku. Jian remarked that it was quite an unusual name and asked where he was from. Mir 1 agreed that it had a refreshing and exotic sound to it. Taiti thanked them both. In his mind, he understood what had happened. The name he used for his speedrunning streams had been carried over and reflected in the game's registration system. The word itself had no meaning in this world, since the concept it referred to back home did not exist here. But then Mir 1 noticed something else on the display. She looked at it with visible surprise and pointed out that Shichiku had not gained a single level. His level had not gone up even once. She looked at the information for a moment longer and then told him, keeping her tone professional, that she would explain how leveling up worked at another time and asked him to wait while she continued processing the registration. She called Jian over to help her. Danya stepped over to Taiti and stopped him quietly. She asked him, in a low and slightly stunned voice, whether he had really defeated the Demon King while remaining at level 1 the entire time. Taiti looked back at her, and with just a small hint of smugness, confirmed that she was correct. That was simply what the speedrun route required. Danya gritted her teeth at the mention of speedrunning again. Shichiku told her that since they had some time to spare, he would take the opportunity to explain things to her properly. Danya cast her soundproofing magic around them so no one could overhear, and Shichiku began. He told her about what he considered to be the miraculous revolution of another verse speedrunning. He explained that while speedrunning looked like a solo activity on the surface, with one person racing through a game alone, he personally thought of it as a team sport. Runners competed against each other for rankings, yes, but when it came to new discoveries and glitch techniques, they shared information openly and cooperatively. There were technical details involved too, like keeping the frame rate as low as possible and never stopping the movement of the right stick. Since Another Verse was a game popular all over the world, there were around 500 runners globally, with about 30 of them based in Japan. Danya was surprised to hear how many people were involved. He continued, explaining that the core rule of an Another Verse speedrun was simply to defeat the final boss as fast as possible. However, the final boss had an enormous amount of health and overwhelming strength, which meant that figuring out the minimum amount of equipment and preparation needed to actually beat the Demon King was the central problem every speedrunner had to solve. In the early days of the community, when runners still leveled up properly, it took around 8 hours to complete a run, and the Holy Sword was still being used as the primary weapon at that stage. Eventually, the community decided it was faster to skip a lot of the leveling process and instead go straight for a weapon with a much higher attack value, such as the Obsidian Greatsword, and use that to power through the Demon King. That approach brought the time down to around 4 hours. After that, discoveries like the wall clip in Arachne's castle and the mysterious warp to the final boss dungeon were found and added to the route. Even so, despite all these discoveries and improvements, the barrier of 2 hours had proven stubbornly difficult to break through. Then, arriving like a comet out of nowhere, the community found it. A completely broken weapon carrying an attack value of 1024. The Strange Rod. It was a glitch that had gone undiscovered for 3 full years after the game's release. And Shichiku said he wished he could show Danya just how enormous the impact of that discovery had been on the entire Anverse community. From that point forward, fueled by friendly rivalry and the power of the strongest wooden stick in the game, runners were able to defeat the Demon King in 25 minutes, even while staying at level 1 the entire time. The difficulty had shot up dramatically as a result, because staying at level 1 meant the Demon King could kill a runner far more easily. But the community had risen to meet it. Danya let out a small laugh and admitted she had not understood a single thing he said. At that moment, Mir 1 called out to Shichiku, thanking him for his patience and bringing over the completed results of his guild registration. Then the door opened and someone new arrived. A woman in armor walked in. It was the guild master of Ida's shield, Kira Lechifica. Mir 1 acknowledged her return. Shichiku felt a rush of emotion seeing her. Kira was the strongest female warrior in the world of Another Verse, and since she never appeared in the speedrun route, it had genuinely been a long time since he had seen her at all. He also remembered her somewhat problematic character design with a mix of feelings. He had always found Kira attractive even through a screen, but now that she was standing right in front of him in person, the experience was more overwhelming and confusing than anything else. He turned to Danya awkwardly and felt the need to clarify that he was not having any improper thoughts. Danya pointed out that she had not said anything. She then asked, just to be sure, whether Shichiku was aware of the relationship between herself and Kira. He confirmed that he was. In his mind, he recalled clearly that Kira was Ida's closest friend and one of the very few people who knew Danya's true identity. Nearby, Mirwan whispered to Jian that the guild master seemed to be in a very bad mood, and that the atmosphere felt tense and unsettling. Jian wondered quietly whether the trip to the castle had put Kira in a sour mood again, as it sometimes did. Kira's eyes moved to Danya, and she addressed her directly. She then turned her gaze to Shichiku and asked who he was. Shichiku introduced himself, stating that starting from that day, he was a new member of the guild, and that he was the otherworld hero. Jian and Mirwan were both visibly shocked to hear it. Kira said nothing for a moment. Then, with a cold and grim expression, she described him as the coward from another world. Danya's face fell. Using her appraisal skill, Kira examined Shichiku and immediately saw that he was level 1. She declared it plainly, calling him trash without any softening of her tone. Kira went on to explain what she had been told back at the castle. Even though Ida had successfully completed the summoning and brought the hero to their world, the hero had apparently lost his nerve, abandoned his mission entirely, and fled without even accepting the holy sword. Shichiku listened and now understood clearly how his actions had been interpreted and reported to the people at the castle. Danya stepped forward to argue that there was a proper reason behind what had happened, but Kira cut her off and told her not to make excuses for him. Kira reached for her sword and drew it. She spoke with controlled fury about the people of this world, including Ida herself, and how much Shichiku seemed to think he could disrespect them. She threw a sword down in front of Shichiku and told him to pick it up. She challenged him to a duel, declaring that a guild like theirs had no use for level 1 weaklings or cowards. Mirwan turned to Jian in a panic, pointing out that Shichiku would be killed. Jian agreed that they needed to do something to stop it. Kira told them both to relax, saying she would use a wooden sword as well. She acknowledged that some of Shichiku's bones might break, but assured them he would not die. Jian tried rapidly to negotiate with her, but was firmly silenced. Kira added that if Shichiku did not want to use a sword, he was free to use his cheap little stick instead. Danya's eyes went wide. Shichiku agreed to the terms without hesitation. Danya was immediately alarmed. Shichiku told himself that backing down here was not something a man did. Danya tried desperately to stop him. Her mind was racing with the knowledge that the stick in Shichiku's possession had an attack value of 1024. It was the same strange rod that had been used to slaughter the Demon King. The thought of what it might do to a human being made her blood run cold. Danya hurried after Shichiku and reminded him urgently that Kira was her very dear and important best friend. Shichiku acknowledged that he knew and told her to trust him, saying he would finish it in an instant. That was exactly what Danya was afraid of. She sat down heavily on the floor, completely overwhelmed. Kira stood her ground with total composure. Danya sat there in tears as the two of them faced each other and prepared to fight. Chapter 4 began with everyone moving to the training ground located behind the Adventurers Guild. Mirwan hovered nearby with visible worry for Shichiku, while Danya was quietly terrified for Kira's safety. Kira looked at Shichiku and remarked that she had half expected him to turn around and flee without going through with it. She asked whether he was going to run away this time too. Shichiku responded lightly that since he did not have a tail, running away with it between his legs was not really an option for him. Kira regarded him with sharp eyes and called him impudent, but acknowledged that at the very least he deserved credit for having the courage to show up. With that, she told him she would take things just a little more seriously and activated her given skill, a special ability known as the goddess's blessing, Valkyrie's sweet etude. Mirwan let out a shocked sound as Kira's armor began to shift and turn white. Jian protested that using a blessing skill was going far too far for a simple duel. Danya watched with a heavy feeling in her chest. In her mind, she thought through what she knew about given skills. They were unique abilities granted to humans directly by the goddess herself. Kira's particular skill, the Valkyrie's sweet etude, used magic to dramatically enhance the user's physical capabilities, allowing them to move and strike at twice their normal strength and speed. It was a straightforward but devastatingly effective skill. But even if Kira's sword abilities were being pushed to a superhuman level, Danya thought grimly. Shichiku had long since stopped operating by ordinary human rules. She cried out that it did not matter how many lives Kira had. She was begging her to stop. Kira murmured quietly that it seemed Danya had taken a liking to Shichiku. Then she raised her sword and called out for the duel to begin. She swung with full force, and Shichiku was standing below her. Her eyes went wide. He was fast, impossibly fast, closing the distance between them in an instant. Kira's competitive instincts kicked in immediately, and she pushed herself to go even faster, a smirk crossing her face at the unexpected challenge. Then she brought her wooden sword down on his head. Everyone stood in stunned silence. Shichiku had lost immediately and was slammed hard into the wall. Mirwan and Jian both cried out and rushed over to him, with Danya following close behind. On the ground, Shichiku allowed himself a quiet moment of relief that he had been wearing clothes. The adventurer's clothing set gave him a combined 15 defense points across all pieces. Jian looked at him in alarm and declared that Shichiku was in serious danger, then ran off immediately to go and fetch recovery potions. Mirwan stayed behind and told Danya to keep watch over Shichiku while she helped. Danya cast her recovery magic over him, and he thanked her. Danya asked him with frustration what exactly he had been thinking going into that. Shichiku told her that it had actually been a very clean and well-timed save. Danya had no idea what he meant. He explained it to her. What had just happened was what was known as a force loss event. No matter what a player did, the game was programmed to ensure they lost this particular fight due to story reasons. It was specifically the fight that occurred when a player greeted Kira at the Adventurer's Guild. From a speedrunning perspective, the fastest approach was to admit being the otherworld hero during the very first line of dialogue, then immediately close the distance to Kira within the first 4 frames and bait her into using a powerful attack for the knockout. Letting the fight drag on would cost several unnecessary minutes. In his own thoughts, Shichika noted that the in-game version of Kira had been a little gentler than the one he had just faced. There were clearly nuances here that differed from the original game, even though the event itself had played out the same way. He was also genuinely amazed at how completely and quickly Danya's recovery magic had healed him. He was about to express his gratitude to Danya when she cut in ahead of him. She told him that she had genuinely believed he was going to hit Kira with a strange rod. Shichiku looked surprised. He told her that for someone who was that important to Danya, there was absolutely no way he could bring himself to hurt Kira in front of her. That was precisely why he had made sure to mention that he already knew the two of them were best friends before the duel started. He had wanted her to understand that he was not going to do anything to harm Kira. Danya looked down at the ground. Then her expression shifted and she erupted, telling him there was no way she could have known that was what he was thinking. She scratched him across the cheek in her frustration. Shichiku complained that he had just taken actual damage from that. Danya told him to be quiet. Mirwan looked over in surprise, noting that the hero seemed to have recovered completely already. In her mind, she watched the two of them bickering and concluded that whatever was going on between them seemed to be fine. Jian came rushing back with an armful of recovery potions, and Danya told him they were no longer needed. Shichiku turned to face everyone with a small, fresh scratch visible on his cheek. Kira studied him and asked directly why he had lost on purpose. Mirwan and Jian were both stunned by the question. Kira explained her reasoning. Shichiku had completely seen through her attack, and she was certain of it. A person who could not read her movements would never have been able to throw themselves directly into the strike the way he had. Someone capable of doing that had to be at least her equal as a warrior, or possibly even better. She asked him plainly why he had chosen to lose. Shichiku stood there for a moment. He recognized immediately that this was a line of dialogue that had not existed in the original game, and he was not sure how to handle it. He could not tell Kira the real reason, which was to save time. After a pause, he said that he had simply had no reason to defeat her. Kira was not his enemy. They were people who would one day stand together to defeat the Demon King, which made them allies and friends. Kira looked at him for a long moment, and then said quietly that he was a difficult person to read. She then addressed him directly and apologized for the rudeness she had shown him earlier. Shichiku said lightly that as long as they were friends now, it was all settled. Kira said she would do her best to work alongside him going forward. She then told Danya that she had something she needed to discuss, and asked both Danya and Shichiku to come with her to her room. Jian immediately asked if he could join them, but Kira told him and Mirwan to return to their regular duties. As she turned to walk away, Kira spoke one more thing. She said that the world had decided to place its hopes on an otherworld hero to defeat the Demon King, and that both the people of this world and Ida herself were counting on Shichiku to deliver on that hope. Then she paused, and something else came through in her voice. She clenched her fist and said that she intended to prove her own worth as someone from this world as well. She had given up her comfortable life as the daughter of a noble family and had devoted herself entirely to training her swordsmanship from the age of 5. Every bit of that sacrifice had been for one purpose, to be the one who defeated the Demon King. She made clear, quietly but with absolute conviction, that she was the one who would do it. Later, in Kira's room, she sat in complete shock after hearing what Danya had to say. Danya had made the decision to tell Kira the truth about everything. Shichiku confirmed that he had already defeated the Demon King. Kira's reaction was immediate and forceful. She refused to accept it, telling them that this was not some kind of joke and that she was going to go and tell Ida about this immediately. Kira was in the middle of expressing her disbelief that Ida had even gone so far as to summon a hero, but Danya cut her off and told her plainly that all of this had happened the previous day. Shichiku added with a slightly smug expression that he had defeated the Demon King 25 minutes after being summoned. To summarize the timeline simply, yesterday the hero was summoned, the Demon King was defeated, and the wyvern at the capital was subdued. Today they were at the Adventurer's Guild. Kira stared at him in stunned silence. She asked how any of that was possible. Shichiku explained that it came from speedrunning, a competition he practiced in his own world centered entirely on defeating the Demon King as fast as possible. Kira looked even more lost than before, unable to make any sense of what he was describing. She turned to Danya and pointed at Shichiku, stating that no matter how one looked at it, this person was simply too far beyond the bounds of normal understanding. Danya told Kira to let go of her common sense on the matter, admitting that she herself had already done so. Kira sat with it for a long moment, clearly struggling, but then acknowledged that Ido would never lie about something as serious as the Demon King. In thinking about it further, it would actually explain a great deal about the strange incidents that had been occurring since the day before. Danya asked what she meant. Kira described what had been reported. Shortly after the hero summoning ritual had taken place, a loud roar had come from the direction of Arachne's castle to the north. Danya said she had a feeling she knew what that was about. Shichika noted that since Arachne's castle was relatively close, the sound easily would have reached the capital, estimating it at about 10 minutes on foot for someone running at speedrun pace. Kira continued, saying that according to the report filed by the A-rank party, known as the Red Lion Group, Arachne spider familiars had been spotted moving in groups throughout the area since the previous day. It appeared as though they were searching for something. Kira then spoke about Arachne herself. Even among the Demon King's Elite Four, Arachne stood out for having the most cruel and shallow personality. For the past 50 years, she had done nothing but slaughter and destroy purely for her own amusement. Those she killed did not simply die. Through her strings and her power, she reanimated them as puppets under her complete control. The most horrifying aspect of her ability was that those she enslaved were forced to awaken their given skills against their will. Shichiku asked about the nature of given skills. Kira explained that while she herself had awakened her skill through years of dedicated sword training, humans could also awaken these abilities when pushed into extreme and desperate circumstances. The goddess who granted these powers was unpredictable, and there was no way to know what kind of power would emerge. The range of abilities that have been awakened across different people spanned from legendary and extraordinary to entirely ordinary and unremarkable. In Shichiku's mind, hearing it described that way, it sounded remarkably like a gacha system with completely random outcomes. Kira went on. Arachne had a particular habit of targeting and torturing beautiful young women, specifically in order to force the awakening of given skills. Those who awakened especially powerful or useful abilities would then be turned into her prized puppets. Shichiku began to say something about the old woman they had met in the capital, the one who could sense and distinguish demons from humans. Danya answered before he could finish. The old woman was one of Arachne's victims from 50 years ago. By either good fortune or bad, Arachne had not been satisfied with the ability the woman had awakened, and as a result, she had been discarded rather than turned into a puppet. Shichiku sat quietly with that for a moment. His fist tightened. The more he heard, the more genuinely sickening it all was. He had always known through the game that stepping outside the safety of the capital meant entering a world completely dominated by demons. But experiencing it from inside that world made the weight of it feel entirely different. The people here had been driven so far into a corner that they had no choice but to place their hopes in someone summoned from another world entirely. Kira pressed on, adding that each of the Elite Four possessed power strong enough to trample over ordinary humans without effort. But with the Demon King now gone, she had no way of knowing what Arachne would do next or how she would react. If they did not move quickly, something terrible was going to happen. Shichiku shifted restlessly at that. Kira pointed out that the situation was made even more urgent by the fact that Arachne's stronghold was located in the suburbs just outside the capital itself. Compared to the other members of the Elite Four, Arachne was far more impulsive and short-tempered. Spies had already been sent out as of the previous day, but there was a real possibility that Arachne might launch an attack on the capital before any report could even come back. It could happen as soon as the following day. Kira said plainly that they could not afford to wait even a moment longer. Shichiku shifted again, visibly restless. Kira said they might be able to mobilize the royal army by today or tomorrow, though convincing the elder sages first would be a necessary and time-consuming hurdle. Before she could finish laying out the plan, Shichiku suddenly stood up and declared that they should go and take the enemy down right now. He said it with a slightly flustered energy, adding that rather than waiting for Arachne to come to them, it made far more sense to go on the offensive immediately. Kira turned to Danya and asked why Shichiku was trembling. Danya took one look at him and recognized the signs immediately. She explained that Shichiku was shivering because he desperately wanted a speedrun. Shichiku insisted that everything was fine and began laying out his reasoning. He had a world record in the true ending category as well, and Arachne had never once caused him to reset a run. His split time for that section was consistently stable, always coming in at the low 15-minute mark. Danya told him to say it in a way that she could actually understand. Shichiku simplified it. If they approached this as a speedrun, they would not even need a full day. It would take roughly 15 minutes to defeat Arachne. Kira was visibly shocked to hear 15 minutes stated so plainly. Shichiku acknowledged the reality of the situation and said that given the stakes, they would need to make some preparations to prioritize safety over pure speed. But he would need Kira's support to do it. Kira flatly said there was no way she was going along with something so incomprehensible. Danya stepped in and called out to Kira directly, asking her to trust Shichiku. Kira looked surprised to hear Danya say so sincerely. She scratched the back of her head and then relented. She reminded herself that she had agreed to be Shichiku's friend before this conversation, and that a knight did not take back their word. With that settled, Shichiku immediately announced that they needed to start preparing right away and that he was heading to the tailor and the item shop. Both girls were caught completely off guard and scrambled to follow after him, calling out for him to wait and to at least explain what he was planning as they went. Passers-by throughout the street stopped and stared as the three of them ran past. Meanwhile, far away at Arachne's castle, Arachne stood looking down at a victim she had been tormenting. She remarked with cold amusement that the person had dared to snoop around in her territory, and noted that humans lately seemed to have no sense of their place. She let out a light, playful giggle. As the tortured man's body went limp and stopped responding, she observed casually that he was already finished and wrote him off as defective goods not worth further attention. Then her thoughts drifted, and a look of eager longing crossed her face. She wanted the otherworld hero. She was thinking about Shichiku specifically, and she told herself with complete certainty that she would make him her puppet no matter what it took. Back in the capital, Shichiku ran ahead with barely contained excitement, while Danya and Kira hurried behind him, both demanding that he slow down and explain his plan to them properly. People all along the street turned their heads to watch the strange sight of the three of them rushing past. Kira found herself thinking about the words her grandfather had lived by, a man who had survived countless life and death battles. He had always said not to yearn to be a giant killer. The kind of heroic story where the weak overcame the strong was ultimately nothing more than a rare exception, something people loved to celebrate precisely because it almost never happened. What truly mattered on the battlefield was having sufficient strength, proper equipment, and enough people. Quantity and quality together were what decided the outcome. The winner and loser were effectively determined before the fighting even began. And yet, looking at this man in front of her, she could not quite finish that thought before it was interrupted. Someone cried out in excitement. It was Shichiku, announcing that a shining scale had finally dropped. He declared that the goddess of random numbers had finally smiled upon them. Danya asked with exhausted relief whether that meant they were finally done breaking rocks. Kira stood nearby, wondering why the hero was out here digging for jewels in the first place. The three of them were at the abandoned mine called Scuva, located on the outskirts of the capital. Shichiku explained that with this, they could safely begin their run the following day. What they were doing today was advanced preparation. Danya sighed and asked what that meant exactly, muttering under her breath about how many hundreds of rocks she had smashed open in the process. Shichiku noted that in older versions of the game, the ore had been a guaranteed drop from the very first rock, and runners had been able to manipulate the random number system to get any rare item they wanted. However, a patch introduced in version 1.05 had made all item drops completely random, which was why it had taken so long. Kira offered some context about the ore itself. Shining Scale was a beautiful mineral with crystals that peeled off like scales, making it highly valuable as a decorative material and capable of fetching a good price. However, it was far too brittle to be used in crafting weapons, so while it could generate income, it had no direct application in combat. She was puzzling over why Shichiku wanted it so badly when her instincts suddenly kicked in and she stopped moving. She signaled quietly for Danya to halt as well. Something had rustled in the bushes nearby. A moment later, a two-headed monster came leaping out. Shichiku reacted instantly and hit it with his wooden stick in one swift motion. The monster wobbled and collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. Shichiku exhaled and muttered to himself that he still was not fond of how frequently monsters appeared at night. Kira stared in disbelief. Shichiku had just taken down an Orthros with a single swing of a wooden stick. She acknowledged out loud that it was a superb display. Danya watched and thought to herself that it was truly the product of a power that came from somewhere beyond this world. Shichiku said they should head back to the guild quickly. Kira called after him and pointed out that he should collect the Orthros as magic stone. In their world, taking magic stones to the guild for purification was the standard way to grow stronger and level up. It was simply common sense. Danya added that, come to think of it, he had not picked up magic stones from the giant spider or the wyvern either. Kira, who was herself at level 40, said honestly that she had to acknowledge his combat ability was genuinely impressive. But walking into a confrontation with Arachne at level 1 was a different matter entirely. That was being reckless to a dangerous degree. Shichiku scratched his cheek and told her he thought it would be fine since this was no longer a speedrun, and that she would understand once she saw him in action. He walked over to where the item had dropped. It was pulsing with a soft glow. He reached his hand out toward it. Suddenly, the item rose up from the ground and shone brilliantly above him. He looked at it as it floated in the air, glowing, and then transformed into a stone that settled into his hand. Kira watched and remarked that nothing seemed particularly unusual about it, and asked what he had seemed so reluctant about. Shichiku held the stone and pointed out that as they could see, the cutscene for that was quite long. The two of them asked what he meant, confused. He explained that the Magic Stone acquisition cutscene only played through once in the game, but it took 32 seconds to complete. Even when skipped, the memory loading that followed meant an unavoidable loss of around 10 seconds. Kira asked him to clarify. Danya followed up by asking whether that meant even leveling up was considered a hindrance during speedrun. Shichiku confirmed that 10 seconds was simply not something that could be ignored in a run lasting less than 30 minutes. Danya then asked whether it would have been worth picking up the magic stone from the wyvern, if that was the case. Shichiku admitted that not collecting items had simply become such a deeply ingrained habit from years of speedrunning that he did it automatically without thinking. Kira had no words. Danya let out a long sigh and said she was losing her sense of what was normal anymore. Kira then said quietly that it sounded like fun, though. Danya turned to look at her. Kira pointed out that Danya's voice had been lively and energetic lately, just like it had been when they were children. Danya looked away and said flatly that Kira was imagining things. She walked ahead and said they needed to get back to preparing for the Arachne subjugation. Kira remained standing for a moment longer, watching after her. That night, the three of them returned to the Capital Adventurers Guild, Ida's shield. Mirwan greeted Shichiku warmly and congratulated him on coming back safely with magic stones. Jian was genuinely impressed by what Shichiku had brought in, especially for someone doing this for the first time. He turned the matter over in his head, knowing that these were not stones that came from weak monsters, and found himself wondering what exactly a level 1 person had managed to defeat to obtain them. Mirwan directed Shichiku's attention to the Magic Stone Purifier, a device built in the style of the Magical Academy. She explained how it worked. Magic stones needed to be placed inside along with a crystallization solvent. While magic stones carried enormous power within them, they also contained miasma, a dangerous corrupting element. If a person absorbed too much miasma, even a human could gradually transform into a monster. Jian added that this was exactly what had happened to the wyvern the other day. It had consumed too many magic stones and monsters, and the accumulation of miasma had eventually transformed it into a monster itself. The higher a creature sat in the food chain, the more susceptible it was to that kind of transformation. Mirwan continued, explaining that by removing the miasma through the purifier, the remaining energy within the stone became safe for humans to absorb and use to grow stronger. Shichiku used the purifier and went from level 1 all the way to level 4 in one sitting. In his own mind, he found the sight of the machine working genuinely exciting to watch, but could not help noticing that the cutscene accompanying the process was very long. Kira then told Shichiku that while they had the opportunity, she wanted to check his given skill, the goddess's blessing, to get a sense of what they were working with. She admitted honestly that she had real reservations about bringing him along at his current level. If there was anything to be confident about, it would have to come from whatever power his given skill carried. Nearby, Jian could not contain his curiosity and wondered aloud where exactly the three of them were planning to go. Kira explained that according to legend, when the Otherworld hero was summoned, they would be blessed with a special skill meant to aid in defeating the Demon King. Under normal circumstances, this skill would have been checked immediately after the summoning, but Shichiku had quite literally run away before any of that could happen. Shichiku muttered that it had been a misunderstanding. Kira told him she could appraise his skill right there and then, as long as he did not refuse. Her appraisal ability was at an upper-class level, making her well-suited for it. Jian and Mirwan immediately perked up with excitement at the prospect of being the first to find out what kind of skill the hero possessed. Jian urged Kira to go ahead, and Mirwan began speculating eagerly about whether it might be an instant kill skill or perhaps something that nullified attacks entirely. Kira told them both to calm down and be patient. Shichiku felt a quiet dread settle over him. This was bad. People had expectations, and the truth was that the newly summoned hero had absolutely no skills at all. He knew exactly how this part of the story went in another verse. Right after the hero was summoned, the discovery that he carried no blessing was meant to shock and disappoint everyone around him. People would react with disbelief that the promised hero, the one they had waited 100 years for, had arrived with nothing. It would raise the painful question of whether the Saintess of Salvation had simply summoned an ordinary human by mistake. Even Ida, who had performed the summoning, had faced criticism for it in the game. The hero's powerful skills were only supposed to emerge later, after defeating each member of the Elite Four. That was how the story was designed. And since he had skipped all of the Elite Four through glitches and speedrunning, he had never actually triggered those skill awakenings. From a pure status standpoint, he was currently nothing more than a weak level 4 ordinary person with no skills and a wooden stick for a weapon. The thought of disappointing the people around him, people he had only just started to get along with, sat heavily with him. Kira looked at her appraisal screen, and her expression shifted with quiet curiosity. She asked what kind of skill it was, and noted that the text appeared to be in a language from another world entirely. Shichiku was caught off guard. He had a skill? That should have been impossible. Kira confirmed that he did indeed have one, but that the letters used to describe it were unlike anything she had ever seen in this world. She attempted to transcribe them carefully. The characters were extremely complicated, and she found she could not quite reproduce them accurately. Shichiku leaned over to look at the letters she had managed to write down. In his mind, what he was looking at looked like corrupted or garbled text. He told the others that the letters appeared to be from his world, but that even he could not read them in this form. Danya asked whether he would even be able to read them if they were from his world. Shichiku turned the problem over in his head. He wondered if this was another bug caused by defeating the Demon King through glitches. Nothing like this had ever been reported in the Anverse study group. He found himself wondering who had designed this, what had gone wrong in the encoding, and what exactly he had actually been blessed with. The question had no answer he could reach right now. Kiira muttered that in that case, she had no choice. She would go and subjugate Arachne alone the following day. Danya and Jian both reacted with shock. Kiira then seemed to remember that she had not yet told Jian and Mirwan the reason behind any of this. Jian brought up the matter of getting permission from the Elder Sages. Kiira told them flatly that she had not obtained permission and was planning to act entirely on her own. Jian pointed out that would definitely cause serious problems down the line. Mirwan added that it was dangerous regardless of permission, given that Kiira's opponent would be Arachne, one of the Elite Four. Kiira acknowledged that she could not share all the details with them, but said that something dangerous was approaching the capital and that if she went alone she could at least drive Arachne off and buy time. Danya looked completely dumbfounded. Kiira laid out her reasoning. The Otherworld hero was only at level 4. After spending half a day digging at the mine, what they had to show for it was a single shining scale, or his given skill was unreadable and unknown. There was no winning element in the picture. She had followed along for half a day out of consideration for Danya, but she genuinely had no idea what Shichiku was doing or what his plan was, and she could not place her trust in something she could not understand. Shichiku apologized for not having explained things more clearly. He assured her that he really did have a strategy. He said that if they combined their strengths properly, even Arachne could be defeated without much difficulty. Kiira looked at him with serious eyes. Mirwan and Jian were both beginning to voice their concerns about the idea when Shichiku told them that the wooden stick would not be usable this time, which meant they needed a different approach entirely. Put simply, what they lacked in levels they could compensate for with money. Mirwan asked what he meant. Jian immediately understood the direction and agreed enthusiastically, mentioning mercenary quests and the possibility of hiring S-rank parties. He also pointed out that the Shining Scale would fetch a significant amount if sold. He even rattled off the names of the S-rank party available. The Silver Dragon Fong, which consisted of Ludol, a silver wolf tribesman known as the Stranger, Mashimu, the One-Eyed Dragon, and Ariha, a genius from the Magical Academy. Kiira acknowledged that if that was Shichiku's plan, he should have said so from the beginning. However, she noted that if she or the guild used their own funds for it, the Elder Sages would inevitably find out. Shichiku thought it over. Then he said that when it came to money, he could take care of it himself. He was about to demonstrate his power from another world, he said, and added with a slightly guilty smile that what he was about to do was a little bad. He asked everyone to keep it between themselves. Jian asked what he meant. Mirwan said it sounded like fun. Danya had a deep and immediate sense that something catastrophic was coming. Shichiku said it had been a while, so he was not entirely sure he could pull it off cleanly, but the method was straightforward. All he needed was the Shining Scale or an irregular slingshot. He placed the single or they had collected back into his inventory and began rapidly equipping and unequipping the slingshot in rapid succession. Jian, Mirwan, Kiira, and Danya all stared as he began vibrating with a familiar, unnatural speed. Then he stopped. He announced that he had done it correctly. They all asked what exactly he had done. Shichiku explained that he had successfully equipped a ghost slingshot. Jian asked what a ghost slingshot was. Mirwan pointed out that his hands appeared to be holding nothing at all. Shichiku told them that in this particular state, if he took the Shining Scale or back out of his inventory, there would now be a great many of them. He demonstrated it as he said it. Everyone stared in stunned silence as an enormous number of scale ores appeared. Shichiku announced that they now had 999 Shining Scale ores. By trading all of them at the Merchants Guild, they would be able to completely max out their available funds. Jian grabbed onto Mirwan as she nearly fainted on the spot. Danya and Kiira were even more deeply shaken than the other two. Danya demanded to know what Shichiku thought he was doing. He answered calmly that it was perfectly safe, explaining that this particular duplication bug did not affect the underlying system in any harmful way. Danya told him that was not what she was talking about. Kiira stared at the pile of ores. Every single one of them was eerily identical in shape, and yet they all appeared to be completely real. Danya pointed out the economic problem. If that mini Shining Scale or suddenly appeared on the market, it would send the entire economy into chaos. Shichiku suggested that since what had multiplied was a mineral rather than actual money, it could simply be treated as though a new mine had been discovered somewhere. Danya responded with sharp sarcasm that there was absolutely no way it would be that simple or that the situation would end there. Kiira stood in silence as reality slowly settled over her. She thought back to how Shichiku had said from the beginning that he had a strategy. She looked at him. The only conclusion she could reach was that this person truly was from another world in every sense of the phrase. Meanwhile, Danya had already lost patience entirely and was biting down on Shichiku's head in frustration. Shichiku yelled that he was taking actual damage and quickly negotiated his way out of it by promising that he would prepare everything perfectly for the following day and that he would defeat Arachne without fail. Chapter 6 opened with Shichiku enthusiastically presenting all 999 Shining Scale ores for examination at the Capital Merchants Guild headquarters. Danya and Kiira stood nervously behind him. The woman working at the counter was just as stunned as the rest of the employees around her. She immediately used her appraisal skill on the oars, certain that a collection of that size had to be some form of fraud. The result of the appraisal left her completely shaken. Every single one of them was real. She could not believe it. Her monocle had never once been wrong in all her years of using it. Shichiku told her to hurry things along. She snapped back to her professional composure and agreed, then leaned over and whispered to a nearby employee that the exchange value came out to 9,990,000 yen in total, instructing him to gather every gold coin they had available. The employee immediately began relaying the instruction to the others and scrambling to locate their sales deposit funds. In Shichiku's mind, he noted with mild displeasure that the real-world nature of the exchange was introducing an unusual and unexpected time loss into the process that he had not fully accounted for. Eventually, bags and stacks of gold coins were brought out and presented to Shichiku, the full sum of 9,990,000 sen laid out before him. He thanked the staff, stuffed everything into his backpack, and immediately dashed out the door with a quick farewell. Danya and Kiira scrambled to run after him. Behind them, the woman at the guild counter stood in a daze, asking herself quietly what on earth had just taken place. At 3 minutes and 15 seconds into the run, Shichiku was already moving at full speed and talking through the plan as he went. The Merchants Guild opened for business at 9 in the morning, and by selling all the duplicated Shining Scale, whereas they had successfully brought their funds up to 9,990,000 yen. He had the peddler's bag and wallet with him, equipment he and the others had prepared the day before that allowed him to carry everything. He slipped through the wall of the tailor shop as he passed it, picking up whatever he needed inside before continuing on. He noted to himself as he ran that what they had just done was a well-known exploit, sometimes called the Shining Scale or cheat, one that was not currently in active use by the speedrunning community. Behind him, Kiira was quietly marveling at the fact that he was apparently capable of explaining all of this while running at full speed without any difficulty. Danya replied simply that it was probably just how he was. Then suddenly a bird landed beside Kiira, carrying a message. It was from Ear1. Kiira read it and her eyes went wide. She found herself wondering whether everything unfolding around her truly was speedrunning and whether all of it had been within Shichiku's plan from the beginning. She called ahead to him and told him there was good news. An exceptionally powerful S-rank party was currently gathered at the North Plaza of the capital. Meanwhile, over at the capital's North Plaza, a crowd of people had gathered and was buzzing with amazement. They were looking at the S-rank party known as Silver Dragon Fawn. Someone in the crowd recognized the Silver Wolf tribesmen among them and could barely contain their excitement. Others around him were equally awestruck and disbelieving that such a famous group was standing right in front of them. One person said they want an autograph. The arch-sorcerer of the Silver Dragon Fawn, a young woman named Eliha, introduced herself grandly as the most brilliant prodigy the Magical Academy had ever produced and announced that autographs were available for 100 sen each. The Silver Wolf tribesman, Little, added that anyone wishing to ruffle his fur was welcome to do so for the price of 1,000 sen. Eliha then added that for an S-rank adventurer of her caliber, everything came at a cost, and that even a handshake with her would run 10,000 sen. Two members of the crowd exchanged quiet remarks that S-rank adventurers were somehow friendlier than expected, though another observer noted that they seemed less like adventurers and more like a popular performance group. Then a new voice came from behind the crowd. A large man pushed his way through and told Eliha that they were not traveling entertainers. This was Mashimu, the leader of Silver Dragon Fawn. He asked the crowd if anyone knew where the otherworld hero could be found. He had heard that 2 days earlier the Saintess of Salvation had successfully completed the summoning, and Eliha added that the party wanted to bring the hero into their group. Mashimu said that if everyone combined their strength, the day when the Demon King could be defeated would finally come within reach. A person in the crowd whispered to the person beside them, asking whether the hero might be the same person who had been doing that strange vibrating thing the other day. The other person confirmed that it was the hero. Someone else noted with impressed surprise that even real S-rank adventurers had come to offer their company to him. One man in the crowd offered to lead the Silver Dragon Fawn party to the Adventurers Guild, where the hero was most likely to be found, and the group began to follow him. Then something happened that threw the crowd into panic. Mashimu suddenly split into two. One of the versions of him dropped to the ground, and the onlooker who had been leading the way fell back in horror, his face pale with shock. He screamed that it was a monster. The fake Mashimu transformed into its true form, a fox-like creature. Eliha remarked that their disguise had been seen through, and both fakes bolted. Then a shadow fell across the fleeing fox creature, and a fist connected with it, sending it flying. The real Eliha stepped forward and unleashed her power, declaring that she would never say such foolish things as the fake had been saying. Lightning came down and struck the false Eliha. The real Mashimu exhaled heavily and said that it had been a close call. He noted that if imposters kept appearing and pulling stunts like that, the reputation of Silver Dragon Fawn would take serious damage very quickly. He then turned and expressed his genuine surprise to an old woman standing nearby, the same hooded woman from before who had the ability to sense demons. He acknowledged that while it was remarkable that she had been able to see through the disguises, she had been wise not to cause a scene right there in the open. in a crowd full of ordinary people with no fighters among them. Shouting that there were monsters present and forcing the creatures to reveal their true nature would have put everyone in far greater danger. The right approach had been to quietly seek help without drawing attention, exactly as she had done. The old woman apologized softly, admitting that even now, after everything she had been through, the sight of monsters still frightened her deeply. Mashimu understood immediately. For someone who was not an adventurer to know so instinctively the correct way to handle a monster encounter, it could only mean that she had lived through something terrible. He asked Elaha to give the old woman some relaxant incense to help calm her nerves. He then assured the old woman gently that everything would be all right, and that together with the hero they would defeat the Demon King. Though privately, he thought to himself that being completely honest, for a novice hero who had only just been summoned, the hero was unlikely to even get a proper chance to show what they could do. Back with Shichiku and the two girls, the three of them were running down Liandao Main Street in the capital. Kira asked incredulously whether they were seriously running all the way to Arachne's castle, and questioned whether Shichiku had lost his mind entirely. Danya said honestly that she could not vouch for his sanity. Shichiku offered as a practical suggestion that if they did not want to run normally, it would actually be faster to travel by doing continuous cartwheels instead. He immediately demonstrated by launching into a series of cartwheels right there on the main street. Both Danya and Kira told him to stop immediately. Shichiku pointed out, as he continued, that if the continuous cartwheel technique was performed correctly, it was possible to move at roughly twice the normal running speed. Continuous cartwheels were actually a technique used by many speedrunners as a way to move faster. However, because the motion required constant and repeated physical input, many runners had developed tendinitis from it one after another. Even Shichiku himself had needed a full 2 weeks to recover from it at one point. Given that it posed a genuine health risk, continuous cartwheels had unfortunately been banned from official speedruns. Kira, hearing about tendinitis, asked whether he had not been pushing himself far too hard. Danya followed up by asking whether people in his world did not simply play those games for fun. Shichiku answered that they were playing for fun, which was precisely why they took it so seriously. Kira looked at him as he said it. The more she learned about him, the more mysterious and difficult to understand he became. They eventually reached a long hallway, and the scene shifted into a memory from 11 years in the past, inside the royal castle. A young girl was shouting and struggling to break free from the people holding her back. She was Kira at 8 years old, the eldest daughter of the Lechifica dukedom. She was crying out for them not to take Ida away. The maids nearby reacted with alarm at the way she addressed Ida, so casually and informally. Kira shot back that it was perfectly fine because the two of them were friends. Ida called out toward Kira from where she was being led away, but a hand rose to stop her. It belonged to the chief priest, Melina Safari. Melina turned to Kira and told her coldly to stop her undignified behavior. Ida had been blessed from birth with the power of the Saintess of Salvation, making her the one who would one day save the world. In preparation for the day of the hero summoning, Ida's training could not be neglected for even a moment. There was no room for children's games. Kira shouted back that she already knew all of that. She was not angry simply because of the training. She was angry because of what they were doing to Ida behind closed doors. She had seen it herself. Even though they covered the evidence with healing potions, she had seen Ida being whipped. Melina responded without remorse, explaining that it was a method of hardening Ida's spirit. The great summoning of the otherworld hero required Ida to chant the holy verse continuously for 10 days and 10 nights without stopping, and Ida had already collapsed on only the second day. The alignment of the stars between both worlds that made the great summoning possible happened only once every 100 years. Failure was absolutely not an option. Against the Demon King's invasion, the otherworld hero was the only light of hope the world had. She then turned the question back on Kira, asking whether even the esteemed daughter of the Lechifica dukedom, second in standing only to the royal family, would be content to let the next 100 years fall into an era of darkness. Kira was furious. She demanded to know what kind of light of hope required bullying a child into performing a summoning. She challenged the logic of it all, asking why a world with its own soldiers and its own people had to rely on a hero dragged in from somewhere else entirely. She could not understand why they were placing all of this on Ida, who was just a child. She called it shameless. One of the maids began to retort that Kira did not know anything about the situation, but Melina stopped her. Instead, Melina turned back to Kira with a cold and cutting tone and suggested that if Kira felt so strongly about it, she could simply do it herself. Then again, she added, Kira had no special skill unlike Ida. For a delicate and well-bred young lady like Kira, Melina remarked with thinly veiled contempt, barking and yelping was probably the most she was capable of. A sharp clang of metal rang out through the hallway. Kira had reached out and snatched a sword directly from one of the soldiers standing nearby. She declared that she, as a member of the Lechifica house, a house that prided itself on the valor of the Three Claws, would become the greatest swordsman the world had ever seen. Better than anyone in this world. Better even than the otherworld hero. She swore on her own name that she would be the one to defeat the Demon King herself, and she demanded that they stop mistreating her friend. Ida stared at her in stunned silence. From that day forward, Kira sought out her grandfather and asked him to take her on as a student. She threw herself into the study of the sword with complete and unwavering dedication. She gave up the music practice she had loved since she was small, setting it aside entirely without looking back. By the age of 15, there was no one left in the entire castle who could match her in a fight. At 17, she finally awakened her given skill. At 18, she defeated the commander of the Dragon Knights in a duel. In recognition of that achievement, she was awarded the Lechifica armor, a set that could only be worn by the single greatest swordsman in the entire kingdom. But for all of that, she had never been able to stop Ida's training. Ida had continued to grow, eventually becoming a saintess with a level of power surpassing every saintess in recorded history. Even now, with the Demon King already defeated by the Otherworld hero, Ida's own fight had not ended. Kira had finally reached a height of power she had once only dreamed of. And yet standing where she was now, she understood something she had not understood as a child. She had been so ignorant of the world back then. She now hoped quietly, with a heaviness that was hard to put into words, that Ida would allow herself to lean on the hero. If only Kira could find a way to carry some of the burden that Ida had been carrying all this time. Back in the present, Shichiku was still running. Kira called after him and pointed out that they had just passed the North Plaza. She asked whether he was not planning to hire the S-rank party after all. Shichiku turned briefly and told her he would not be hiring them. Kira was visibly taken aback. Shichiku explained that he had not been able to say so the night before with Jian present in the room. Danya turned the conversation over in her mind and realized that she had actually never heard him say outright that they would hire anyone. The S-rank party Silver Dragon Fong would not be appearing in this plan at all. Kira asked what the plan actually was then, but Shichiku simply kept running without answering. The time check read 6 minutes and 35 seconds. 50 years ago, at the outskirts of the capital in a small place called Tadanka Village, there lived a young girl named Lauren. Her younger sister was named Noran. One morning, Noran eagerly asked Lauren to come with her somewhere. Lauren checked on her sister first, asking whether her fever had finally gone down. Noran assured her cheerfully that it had completely passed and that she was perfectly fine. A man nearby, with a carriage, noticed the two of them getting ready to head out. Lauren told him they were going up to the mountains to pick strawberries. The man's expression became a little concerned. He mentioned that monsters had apparently been roaming around the surrounding area recently, and that the village lord had put out a warning for people to be careful when going outside. He told the two sisters to watch themselves, adding warmly that they were after all the prettiest girls in the entire village. Noran laughed openly at that, saying he always said the same thing. The man replied that everyone in the village thought so too. As the two girls headed out, a few other villagers called out to them along the way. One man teased them about splitting the strawberry jam again when they came back. Another told Noran not to push herself too hard. An old woman from the village reminded them to be home well before dark. Noran agreed with bright enthusiasm and called out a cheerful farewell as the two of them set off. Once they were up on the mountain picking strawberries, Noran brought up the topic of the Otherworld hero. Lauren asked what had gotten into her. Noran said she had been reading through records of past hero adventure logs and had been completely captivated by all the places mentioned in them. Places like the Great Tree of Life, the Magic Crystal Cave, and the primeval forest of Dragon Bones. All those breathtaking and beautiful locations that past heroes had actually traveled through. She found herself wondering out loud how a person could ever get to go on a journey like that alongside the hero. Lauren responded with gentle skepticism, pointing out that going on a journey was a rather ambitious idea for someone with Noran's fragile constitution. Noran protested that it was not like that at all. She had been reading about given skills, she said excitedly. She had found in a book. They were special abilities granted to humans by the goddess herself. If a person trained hard enough, they could receive an extraordinary blessing, and with that kind of power, even going on an adventure would be well within reach. Lauren smiled at her sister's boundless confidence. She said it was quite something, but gently reminded Noran that by the time the next hero was summoned, the two of them would both be old women. Then Lauren suddenly stopped moving. Noran noticed and looked at her with concern. Lauren said quietly that she smelled something. There was no scheduled burning being done anywhere near there. She looked down toward the village below, and what she saw froze her in place. The village was on fire. Enormous spider monsters were moving through it, tearing everything apart. Both sisters stood paralyzed with terror. Neither of them had noticed that another monster had crept up directly behind them. Noran screamed when she saw it. The giant spider declared that it had finally found what it was looking for. It said the two of them would make fine tributes to Arachne, pretty faces for its master. What followed was brief and brutal. Lauren's battered body fell to the ground, and Arachne's voice rang out declaring her skill to be worthless trash. One of the spiders said that defective goods needed to be properly branded. Noran, caught in a spider's web, screamed for her older sister. The spider turned its attention to Noran, and smaller spiders began skittering toward her. The giant spider wondered aloud whether this one would yield a better skill. Noran cried out in agony, begging it to stop. The sounds of tearing and snapping filled the air. Lauren lay too broken and weak to do anything but lie there and listen to her little sisters screaming in desperate pleas. Noran's voice rang out one last time. Then, abruptly, an old woman jolted awake in her room, crying out Noran's name. She was gasping and shaking. She was in the capital. She was in her own room. The monsters were not there. She told herself over and over again that she was safe. Then the grief that had never fully left her broke through, and she sobbed deeply and without restraint. Meanwhile, back with Kira and the others, the time was 9 minutes and 31 seconds. They had arrived at a place known as the Spider Highway. It was the site of what had once been Tadanka Village. Shichiku explained that since he already had the Strange Rod, they would be taking the Spider Highway route instead of going back through the Forest of the Dead, as it was the closer path. Kira looked at the ruins around her and recognized immediately what Arachne had done to this place. By royal decree, entering Arachne's domain was forbidden to anyone regardless of rank or standing. The destruction around them seemed strangely fresh, as though it had not weathered or decayed the way ruins normally did. She wondered whether it was the miasma preserving everything. Looking at it all, it felt as though people had been living there only moments ago. Danya called out to Kira and pointed ahead to where Shichiku was already moving further away, silently urging her to hurry up. When Shichiku glanced back and saw them following, he felt a small wave of relief and told them to keep pace with him, warning that what lay ahead was the hardest section of the entire Arachne subjugation speedrun. Kira pointed out that Arachne's castle was still far ahead of them. At that moment, enormous spider monsters rose up and loomed over all three of them. They were Arachne's underlings. Kira instinctively began to reach for a given skill, preparing to activate the Valkyrie suite. But Shichiku stopped her and told her to hold it in reserve for the actual fight with Arachne. Kira was shocked and said that even he would not be able to handle that many enemies. Shichiku replied that while defeating them all with the wooden stick would be perfectly possible, it would take too much time, so they were not going to fight at all. They were going to cut straight through without engaging. He told them to copy exactly what he did. Kira stared at him in disbelief. Danya told her they had no time to argue and that they needed to go. Shichiku explained as they began moving that while the spider movement patterns were completely fixed, getting caught by even one of them would cost 10 seconds or more each time. The key was to constantly shift direction between left and right at a 60-degree angle the moment the spiders began to react. Under normal conditions, the stamina drain would have been a serious concern at level 1, but since this run was on a higher level, that aspect was manageable. It was still a technically demanding section that required fast and precise movement throughout. Danya looked back and saw the enemies closing in fast behind them. Shichiku announced that it was time and told them to throw their gold coins. He explained quickly that throwing coins at enemies dealt enough damage to guarantee an escape. Whatever amount of money was thrown was lost permanently, but by scattering coins randomly behind them as they ran, the giant spiders would stop pursuing them entirely. Having a large amount of money made this technique much more effective, which was why they had needed so much of it. As for why monsters were attracted to gold coins in the first place, he admitted he genuinely had no idea. They cleared the spider highway safely. Shichiku called it a good pace and genuinely praised both of them, saying they showed real speedrunning talent. Danya stared at him and asked flatly whether all that gold had been gathered specifically for this. She also asked whether they had really needed that much. Kira remarked dryly that being praised for running fast was not something she had ever expected to feel good about. In Kira's mind, something else was sitting uncomfortably with her. The hero had the power to take down every single one of those enemies without difficulty, and yet he had scattered money around to avoid fighting them entirely. On top of that, he had shown not even a trace of grief or recognition when they passed through the ruins of what had clearly been a village destroyed by Arachne. She began to wonder quietly, and with growing unease whether, to the hero, all of this was nothing more than a game. Far away, back at the Demon King's throne room the previous day, a voice had called for the gathering of the Demon King's beloved children. It summoned the spider that dispensed white thread, the duke soaked in red blood, and the hungering quagmire, telling them all to hurry. The king of despair, Apocalypse, had reigned until his end, and now his children stood before his corpse. An offering would be made in his name. The voice belonged to a woman who was the Demon King's own daughter, Morphomet. She gave her command with cold fury, telling those assembled to bring her the head of the irritating otherworld hero. One day earlier, while Shichiku's group had been out at the abandoned mine digging for shining scale ores, 4 figures had gathered around the Demon King's round table. Morphomet was one of the Demon King's elite 4, and the others arrived through something called the Gate of Purgatory, a transportation magic that connected each of the elite 4's individual strongholds directly to the round table. One of the arrivals was Arachne, the queen of spiders, and she came in slightly behind the others. Another of the 4, the one known as the hungering quagmire, Raspy, immediately called her out for being slow and asked with mocking amusement whether Arachne had forgotten how to use transportation magic, adding a snide comment about insects having poor memories. The blood-soaked Duke, Brams, remarked that it was quite a spirited greeting and noted with mild disapproval that young ones these days were far too hot-headed. Raspy shot back that the old man was just showing off his age and found it annoying. Raspy then directed a deliberately provocative comment at Arachne, asking whether Brams treated an old spider hag like her as a child too. Arachne's eyes went cold and she told him to shut his mouth, calling him a low-class demon. Raspy laughed and told her not to get so worked up, pointing out that her puppets were probably reaching their expiration date anyway, and gesturing at the wrinkles on the ones nearby. Brams listened to the two of them bicker without stepping in. Arachne and Raspy locked eyes in a silent and hostile glare. Morphomet told all of them to be silent. She said they had surely already understood why she had called everyone to the round table. Their great father of darkness, the demon king Apocalypse, their dark son, was gone, lost to them. Then Morphomet's composure broke completely, and she wailed, crying out that her papa was dead. She could not believe it. Her father had never lost to anyone, and yet he was gone, and it was so unbearably cruel. She spoke of how kind he had been to her, letting her listen to the death cries of humans while she passed the time. She then turned to the others and demanded to know why none of them were crying. Did they not have hearts? She ordered them all to cry. Raspy and Arachne both produced exaggerated and entirely false sobs to satisfy the demand. Morphomet then continued, telling them that the previous day the humans had summoned a hero from another world, and that this hero had killed her father. Raspy's reaction was immediate and loud. He burst out laughing and refused to believe it, pointing out that it was completely impossible for a hero summoned only the day before to have already defeated the Demon King on the very same day. He declared openly that Morphomet had to be out of her mind if she was seriously claiming that. Morphomet reached out and grabbed his mouth to silence him. She asked him coldly whether he was mocking her, saying it was rich coming from an upstart slime. She then acknowledged that she understood it seemed impossible and that she had doubted her own eyes when she saw it. But rather than simply telling them, she would show them. She moved to stand beside a large mirror called the Eye of the Dead, a device that projected the final moments experienced by someone before their death. All four of them gathered and watched in silence. The image appeared. A figure in nothing but undergarments was visible on the screen. Arachne stared with wide eyes. Brams identified him as the Otherworld hero. Raspy demanded to know why the hero was nearly naked. Raspy also noticed Danya appear in the image, called her cute, and expressed a desire to keep her. The scene then showed the hero engaging with the Demon King directly. They watched as the hero avoided every single attack with clean and precise movement, and then struck back. Brams reacted with shock when the Demon King went down after only 3 hits, and wondered aloud whether some kind of debuff had been applied to weaken him beforehand. Raspy then caught something that made everything worse. The hero was not using the Holy Sword. He had been hitting the Demon King with a wooden stick. Brams stared at the image and said he could not process what he was looking at, asking the others whether ordinary wooden sticks had somehow become that powerful recently. Raspy stated flatly that what they were watching was cheating. The Demon King was then slain on screen. Arachne looked at the image with a slow grin forming on her face. Morphomet spoke again, confirming that was the full account of what had happened. Her father had been killed by the Otherworld hero within just a few minutes, and to make it even more unbearable, it had been done in such a childish and undignified manner. She declared it absolutely unforgivable. The hero who had killed and humiliated her father would be made to suffer and be ridiculed. She swore to kill him in the most horrible way imaginable. Someone called Arachne's name. Morphomet observed that Arachne appeared to have something on her mind and told her not to hide any information she might have about the hero. Arachne met Morphomet's gaze. In her own mind, she was thinking about Morphomet, a girl who felt entitled to give her orders simply because of whose daughter she was. But looking at the situation now from a new angle, a wide grin spread across Arachne's face. She told Morphomet smoothly that she had nothing to share. Morphomet studied her for a moment. Later, back at Arachne's own castle, she moved quickly through the corridors with barely contained excitement. She muttered to herself about how desperately she wanted the Otherworld hero's power. With that power in her hands, she could kill Morphomet, that arrogant girl who thought bloodline made her special. And then she could deal with Raspy, that impertinent little slime, and Brams too, since his presence alone irritated her. All of it would be possible once she turned the Otherworld hero into her puppet. The power that had slaughtered even the Demon King with a wooden stick, the overwhelming strength of a god of war that nothing could stand against, was something she craved completely. Even though she had no tolerance for men as a rule, the hero's ability was clearly of legendary class, and she had to have it. And she possessed exactly the skill needed to make it happen. She chanted the words and activated it. Karna Kavacha. It was Arachne's legendary skill, one she had extracted from a young girl long ago through her methods. No matter the weapon, whether it was a strike from an adamantine sword or the most powerful spell a great magician could produce, she would not receive a single wound. It was an absolutely invincible defense. No matter how powerful the hero's wooden stick was, it fell under the category of a physical attack. Even if it had been enough to defeat the Demon King and everything else before it, it would not work on her. And if his attacks could not reach her, then he was nothing but ordinary flesh and blood. She could mock him and take him apart at her leisure. Karna Kavacha was the strongest shield in existence. It could not be turned into a weapon to defeat the Demon King itself, but against the hero's most powerful attack, it was Arachne's ability to nullify it completely and at will. Once she claimed the hero's power, she would finally become the ruler of this world in both name and reality. Whatever logic or reasoning one applied, strength was what determined everything in this world. And she had spent too long as a loser, doing whatever the Demon King commanded. That was over now. No one would ever give her orders again. Anyone who dared to resist would be killed. She would build her perfect world of absolute obedience. She would become a true powerhouse. She would become the new Demon King. This was real freedom. This was real happiness. She let out a gleeful sound at the thought of how entertaining it was all going to be. She called out to her underlings and urged them to move faster, demanding they bring the hero to her immediately. Then she stopped. Something was in front of her that she had not expected. At 12 minutes and 35 seconds, the hero, Danya, and Kira were already standing before Arachne. The ground around them rumbled, and the hero greeted Arachne with a cheerful wave. At 12 minutes and 35 seconds, the hero, Danya, and Kira stood face to face with Arachne. Arachne was visibly surprised by their sudden appearance. The hero greeted her. Kira looked at the figure before them and recognized her immediately. This was Arachne, one of the Demon King's elite four. The memory of the ruined village flashed through her mind. She told herself firmly that they were going to bring Arachne down no matter what. Just before they had entered the fight, Shichiku had gone over the strategy with them. He had warned them that Arachne would be releasing a constant and endless stream of small spiders to attack them throughout the battle. While that was happening, Arachne herself will be left defenseless against direct attacks. Shichiku had asked Kira to focus entirely on wiping out the small spiders using wide-ranging attacks that could hit multiple targets at once. Kira understood that her role was purely defensive crowd control. She asked Shichiku honestly whether they truly had a real chance of winning this fight. Danya started to point out that they had already defeated the Demon King, who was supposed to be stronger than Arachne, but Shichiku cut her off. He explained that based on what he had observed, the health of the wyvern in the capital, and the way the Orthrus encounter had played out in the outskirts when only weak monsters usually appeared in that area, combined with the behavior of the spiders they had just encountered, he had come to a conclusion. When he had defeated the Demon King, the game had been set to easy mode. But because he had cleared that final fight without taking a single hit, the difficulty had likely shifted upward to very hard. Danya asked what exactly that meant. Shichiku explained it plainly. The current version of Arachne they were facing was stronger than the Demon King he had defeated. Kira stammered and Danya demanded to know why he was telling them this now and making them anxious right before the fight. Shichiku assured them that the speedrun route he had planned was already built around this possibility and asked them to trust him. He went on to explain that because Arachne's health was significantly high, she could not be taken down in a single hit and would need to be struck many times. Clearing out the small spiders before and during the fight was not optional but an essential part of making victory possible, which was precisely why he had brought Kira along. At 12 minutes and 48 seconds, Arachne let out a long and satisfied laugh. She had not expected the hero to come to her directly. She had been wanting to meet the otherworld hero, and now that he was here, she made clear she had no intention of letting him leave. She noticed that he had brought company and looked over Kira and Danya with amused eyes, remarking that the hero was quite considerate for bringing new toys along. She grinned and declared that she would turn every single one of them into her puppets. Then something happened with terrifying speed. Kira felt as though holes had been punched straight through her body all at once. She trembled and dropped to the ground. When she managed to take stock of herself, she found she was completely unharmed, not a single wound on her. What she had felt was not a real attack. It was pure bloodlust, so concentrated and overwhelming that her body had reacted as if it were physical. But that realization did not help her. Her body refused to move. Danya called out to her in alarm. In Shichiku's mind, he immediately recognized what had happened. Kira had been stunned by Arachne's intimidation attack, a technique that triggered at the very start of the fight with a 5% chance of occurring. It was a small stroke of bad luck, worse RNG than he would have liked. Arachne looked at Kira crumpled on the ground and remarked coolly that the female knight appeared to be nothing more than decoration. Shichiku threw a purple potion across to Danya, a mana recovery salve, and told her it was time to switch to the backup strategy. Since Kira was still stunned and unable to fight, he was asking Danya to take over the job of clearing the small spiders until Kira recovered. Danya stared at him in shock. He explained that he had calculated it carefully, and that with the purple potion Danya would have just barely enough magical energy to manage it. Danya steadied herself and understood what she needed to do. Arachne watched them moving around and remarked that whatever they were planning was completely pointless. She released her spiders. They surged forward. Danya activated her skill, Nakomata Fire, a primary area of effect magical attack that consumed MP to launch fireballs in wide bursts. She called out as she unleashed it, sending balls of fire crashing into the wave of small spiders and burning them back. Behind her, Kira was still on the ground. She looked ahead at Danya, who in her heart was still Ida, fighting Arachne even while her own enemy was standing right in front of where Kira knelt. Kira's thoughts turned on herself with sharp frustration. She demanded of herself what she was even holding her swords for. She told herself to get up and go, but her body still would not respond. She whispered to herself that it was impossible, that she was scared. In her mind, a cascade of dark thoughts followed. She had believed that she had finally reached a point where she could be of real use to Ida. What was the point of being called the greatest swordsman in the kingdom if she could not even move in the moment it actually mattered? Everything she had worked for and built up to this point fell hollow and meaningless in this moment. Then a voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. Shichiku told her that since her stun had probably not worn off, yet she should not look away, and instead just watch what was about to happen. He told her this was the finale of the Arachne subjugation speedrun. Kira looked up at him. Arachne's voice cut in at the same moment, declaring that it was already too late for the hero regardless of what he was planning, because she was now fully covered by Karna Kavacha. Shichiku acknowledged it openly and explained to those listening that Karna Kavacha was Arachne's defensive skill, a legendary class ability that made her completely invincible to all attacks. Danya stared in shock. Arachne declared proudly that Karna Kavacha could nullify every single form of attack without exception, whether physical or magical. She was always invincible and therefore the strongest. She told the hero that it served him right and that it was his destiny to die here without being able to do anything about it. Then coins struck Arachne square in the head. Arachne recoiled in shock. Her skin visibly peeled where they had hit. Danya stared in disbelief, unable to understand why an attack had worked at all. The coins clattered to the ground. Shichiku reached down and grabbed another handful. Coin throwing. Arachne tried to make sense of what the hero was throwing at her, but before she could process it, another handful of coins came flying into her face. Shichiku explained the situation as he went. The core problem with the Arachne fight was her absolutely invincible defense skill, Karna Kavacha. Since it nullified every form of attack, whether physical, magical, or spiritual, the strange rod was completely useless here. Danya pointed out in confusion that coin throwing was just a method for escaping from enemies, not an attack at all. Shichiku confirmed that was exactly right. It was not classified as an attack anywhere in another versus game system, which was precisely why Karna Kavacha had no effect on it. In the game, coin throwing was a special action with two specific properties. It dealt damage to enemies, and it guaranteed the ability to flee from them. However, since Arachne was a boss encounter, the flee function did not activate. That left only the damage-dealing property available, and that was what they were exploiting. Because they could not run away, they could keep throwing coins indefinitely without limit, turning it into a sustained source of damage that bypassed Karna Kavacha entirely. Fighting Arachne by normal means would result in certain death. Under normal circumstances, a player would need to obtain a legendary class item capable of undoing Arachne's skill, but tracking that item down cost a significant amount of time. This was where coin throwing became the perfect solution. The damage it dealt was directly tied to how much money was thrown each time, and with their current funds, the fight would take roughly 30 throws of the maximum amount to finish. The time check showed 13 minutes and 56 seconds. Arachne was struggling. Under the continuous barrage of coins, she could barely move, let alone mount any kind of counterattack. She pointed furiously at her spiders and commanded them to stop the annoying hero from throwing any more coins. But the spiders were met with fire. Danya declared that she would not let a single one of them interfere. Arachne cursed the humans as fragile defects and screamed that she would kill every one of them. Then another handful of coins hit her in the face. The hero kept throwing without pause or hesitation. Arachne took hit after continuous hit until she finally collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. Shichiku noted to himself that it had gone well. He had time to knock down at just the right moment. When Arachne reached half health, landing a knockdown with precise timing allowed the player to cancel her second phase transformation entirely. The second phase involved her shooting threads in all directions and was something he had no desire to deal with. He was also glad to have skipped the transformation cutscene, which ran for a full 60 seconds. In Arachne's mind, the reality of her situation settled in with bitter fury. She no longer had enough health remaining to trigger the transformation. Another set of coins came hurtling toward her. Kira sat watching the whole thing with wide eyes and a completely overwhelmed expression. A man who had done nothing but throw coins over and over, and a monster who was being brought to her knees by those same coins. She found herself genuinely wondering whether this was truly how the hero fought Arachne. In her mind, she looked at Arachne and thought that the great and terrible queen of spiders, one of the Demon King's elite four, somehow looked like a clown. And then something else struck her. Shichiku had no fear of Arachne at all. None. Any ordinary person standing before one of the elite four would be crushed by the weight of the tragedy and horror surrounding her very name, by the fear that came with knowing what she had done and what she was capable of. But Shichiku had brushed past all of that completely. His entire focus was on one thing only, defeating the enemy as fast as possible. Nothing else existed for him in that moment. Kira's eyes went wide as the full picture came together in her mind. This was the otherworld hero. No, she corrected herself. This was speedrunning. She muttered under her breath that it was truly ridiculous. Completely and utterly ridiculous. Meanwhile, Danya was still fighting the remaining small spiders, but her flames sputtered and died out. Her mana was completely empty. She had already used the potion she had been given, and she could feel there were only a few more hits she could manage. If she had Ida's body rather than Danya's, she would never have run out of mana from something on this scale. Then a giant spider turned and surged toward her. Danya gritted her teeth and braced herself. But then the sharp sound of a sword being drawn rang out. Kira's voice called out as she activated her skill, the Valkyrie's Suite and Waltz. She told Shichiku to leave it to her. Shichiku glanced back over his shoulder and announced that it would end in just 4 more throws. Then Arachne's voice came out broken and desperate. She said she understood and begged them to let her go. She swore to pledge her loyalty to them completely. She offered Shichiku everything she had, her puppets, her land, her castle, her servants, anything at all. She would do whatever the hero commanded. She could not stand the thought of dying in such a pathetic and humiliating way. She pleaded for her life. Shichiku stood still for just a moment. The word that caught his attention was life. Something stirred in him, and images came flooding back without warning. The ruined village, the old woman, her sister, the sounds he had heard described, the things Arachne had done to people across 50 years and was still doing without remorse. He stood with all of it for only a brief instant. Then he said quietly that time was more important than life. He hurled the next handful of coins. Arachne screamed in terror. A loud crash followed. Shichiku announced that the timer had been stopped. The time was 15 minutes and 38 seconds. Chapter 10 opened with Arachne screaming that she had done nothing wrong as she died, and in the moment of her death, the soul of No Ran was finally released. The Arachne subjugation was complete. Shichiku paused. His body slumped forward with the release of tension. Danya asked quietly if it was over. The time stood at 15 minutes and 38 seconds. Shichiku announced that the Arachne subjugation speedrun was officially finished and immediately moved into his post-run reflection, as was his habit. They had come in 38 seconds over the 15-minute mark. While the unexpected 3-minute time loss at the Merchants Guild had been painful, he felt it was still a solid run overall considering how well they had managed to compensate for it with clean play throughout the rest of the route. Kira told him firmly to stop rambling. Shichiku explained that he reflected on every run after it ended because he needed to make the most of whatever he learned for the next attempt. Kira was visibly startled to hear that there was going to be a next time. The castle suddenly began to shake and rumble around them. It was crumbling. Shichiku recalled that a cutscene was supposed to trigger at this point. Danya told everyone to come close to her. She had a special magic tool with her called the Matatabi Travel, a classic and rare item loaned to her by the royal family that allowed instant transportation to any previously visited location. She called out the destination, and all 3 of them vanished. Behind them, the castle collapsed entirely, and the remaining spiders began to fade away one by one. The group reappeared just outside the capital Falschlaw's Adventurers Guild, Ida's shield. Jian spotted them the moment they arrived, and came rushing over with visible relief and worry written all over his face. He acknowledged that they had somehow made it back. He then pressed something into Shichiku's hand. It was the jailbreak thread, a rare consumable item that allowed the user to escape from various dungeons and boss battles. It had cost him 8,000 nissen. Shichiku looked at it with a blank expression, genuinely unsure what to make of it. Jian asked why he was looking so clueless, and reminded him that they were supposed to be going to subjugate Arachne. Shichiku's eyes went a little wide. Kira answered for them. Danya stood there, quietly realizing that it had not even been 9:30 yet, given that the whole thing had only taken 15 minutes. Jian explained that he had bought the item because he wanted Shichiku to at least have a way to come home alive if things went wrong. Even if he was the otherworld hero, Jian said he would feel terrible if a guild junior of his died out there. Shichiku looked at Jian and opened his mouth to say something. Then Jian's voice suddenly rang out in complete shock upon hearing that Arachne had already been defeated. Meanwhile, back at the Demon King's round table, Brahms noted with quiet disbelief that Arachne had been sitting right there with them just the day before. Raspy said they should watch the Eye of the Dead again. When the cause of death came up as gold coins, Raspy burst out laughing and said it was so absurd that he could laugh about it forever. He added that it served the spider hag right. Morphomed observed that Karna Kavacha had ultimately been a skill Arachne had taken from someone else, and that Arachne had been defeated without ever understanding its own weakness. She called it a fitting end for a foolish insect. Raspy agreed enthusiastically, declaring Arachne to have been trash and the worst of the Elite Four. Brahms remarked dryly that both Raspy and Arachne were real demons through and through. In his own mind, he acknowledged the accuracy of his own words without any irony. Their mockery of Arachne was not empty arrogance. It was the privilege of the strong. But Brahms was also turning something over much more carefully in his mind. He laid out the facts as he understood them. The hero had defeated the Demon King on the very first day of being summoned. The hero had then defeated Arachne on the 3rd day. As difficult as both facts were to accept, they had happened. What troubled Brahms most was the question of how the hero had known Arachne's weakness, when even Brahms himself had not known it going into their first encounter with one another. He considered whether the hero might possess some legendary class skill from the goddess, perhaps future sight or an advanced appraisal ability. But even that failed to fully explain it. The hero's movements had looked too refined, too practiced, as though he had already known Arachne's weakness from the very beginning and had experienced that exact same fight many times before, repeating it over and over until every movement was completely natural. Something like that was supposed to be impossible. He pushed further. The Demon King did not have a conventional weakness. Humanity had thrown everything it had at the Demon King for thousands of years and had never managed to land a decisive blow. The idea that the Demon King could be killed with a single swing of a stick simply because a hero had shown up made no logical sense. And then there was the question of whether gold coins were even truly Arachne's weakness to begin with. Was it really different from throwing an ordinary stone? From a purely physical standpoint, ordinary gold coins should not carry that kind of destructive power, even with enchantment applied. And if the gold coin method was genuinely Arachne's weakness, why had Arachne herself not known about it? She was not particularly brilliant, but had she truly been foolish enough to place blind faith in a defensive skill without ever testing its limits? Bram stopped himself. He recognized that he was building speculation on top of speculation without enough reliable information to support the conclusions he was reaching. He told himself firmly to stop there. In his mind, one thing was clear regardless of all the unanswered questions. This hero was an unprecedented threat. The thousands of years of demon dominance over the world were on the verge of crumbling. The hero needed to be either eliminated or brought over to their side by some means. The thought of it all was beginning to sit very badly with him. He told himself with absolute certainty that he was not going to go up against that hero personally. He wondered privately whether Morphemet could be persuaded to let go of her desire for revenge. He concluded that was almost certainly impossible. Nearby, Raspy grinned quietly and muttered to himself that it was clearly not just about the wooden stick. The hero was genuinely interesting. Some time later, Shichika woke up from a long and deep sleep. He felt considerably rested. He checked the time. Out in the hallway, Kira heard noise coming from inside, and Danya announced that they were coming in. When the door opened, they were met with the sight of a completely unclothed Shichiku. Kira let out a shriek. Danya asked him why he had no clothes on. Shichiku, still only half awake, asked them if they had any idea where his smartphone was. He had been searching for his clothes and could not find them anywhere. He muttered that if this kept up, it was going to affect his work back home. Danya quietly told Kira that he was clearly still not fully awake yet. Kira told him to put something on immediately. A little while later, the three of them were sitting around a table together. Shichiku apologized for having shown them something unpleasant. Kira, still visibly flustered and pink in the face, agreed that it had indeed been unpleasant. Danya asked whether he was properly awake now. He confirmed that he was. In his mind, he ran through everything that had happened. He had been summoned to the world of another verse. On the first day, he had speedrun the Demon King, as he always did. 2 days after that, he had taken down Arachne, one of the Elite Four. This was now the 4th day. He found himself wondering anxiously how things were looking back at his workplace. He then brought something up that had been on his mind for a while. He asked why Kira was wearing that particular outfit. In his own thoughts, he recognized it immediately as Kira's costume from the first DLC of Another Verse, a holiday Valkyrie outfit. He thought it was very nice. Kira looked away. She explained that since Shichiku had been fighting nonstop for 3 days, she was certain fatigue must be setting in, and she wanted him to put fighting out of his mind for at least 1 day and allow his body and mind to properly rest. She said it as someone being genuinely considerate of him. Shichiku began to respond, and the moment he started, Kira immediately wanted to know what he was going to say. She asked whether it was strange for her to be dressed differently from usual, a note of self-consciousness creeping into her voice. Shichiku thought about it for a brief moment, comparing it privately to Kira's other outfit, the rather revealing bikini armor from the game, and concluded that what she was wearing right now was not strange at all. He told her honestly that it suited her very well. Kira went red and scoffed, turning her face away. Shichiku was left genuinely confused by her reaction. Danya stepped in and suggested they all go for a walk around town since the weather outside was beautiful. Kira agreed readily. Shichiku said there was somewhere in particular he wanted to go. The three of them headed outside together. As Kira walked beside him, she found herself looking at his face and noticing, perhaps for the first time with full awareness, that he had quite a nice face. She felt her cheeks go warm and quickly looked away. She became aware of her own thoughts and told herself to calm down, reminding herself that they were in the middle of a national crisis. Even Ida was willing to put herself in danger. But just a short while ago, Ida had reacted with total calm after seeing a naked Shichiku, which made her wonder if the two of them were already in that kind of relationship. She looked over at Kira, who seemed frustrated, and noted to Shichiku that Kira was acting interesting today. Shichiku observed that at least this did not seem like a problem he was familiar with. Kira Relechifika was 19 years old, and she was clearly irritated. A young child suddenly pointed at Shichiku and identified him as the vibrating hero. The child's mother tried to quiet him down. The child explained that it was actually his mother who had told him that the hero from another world was a vibrating man. The mother tried to hush the child, but the people nearby had already heard. They began asking among themselves whether Shichiku was really the otherworld hero. Word spread quickly through the crowd, and soon everyone was rushing toward him. One man had heard the story from someone named Jian, and he realized out loud that Shichiku was not just some suspicious stranger after all. Kira quietly cursed Jian's name under her breath. Danya pointed out that Arachne's castle was so close to the capital that there was really no hiding what had happened anyway. Shichiku took in the amount of attention he was suddenly receiving. It reminded him of the feeling of being in a waiting room at a speedrunning event. A small child approached him and called him Mr. Hero, asking him to do the vibrating thing again. The child had heard he used it against the wyvern and wanted him to do it for them as well. Shichiku realized this moment was not something that existed in the game's story. He glanced at Danya, who gave him a nod of approval. He then performed the vibrating motion, which startled even Kira. Later, in the refugee quarter of the new town inside the capital, Shichiku stood outside a window and asked if he could come in. The old woman inside was shocked to find the hero standing there. Shichiku gave her a warm smile. The old woman invited him in and apologized for not having a proper guest chair. Shichiku gently insisted that since they had shown up without warning, she should be the one to sit. He then opened his palm to reveal a flower-like item, explaining that it was something dropped by Arachne and that he believed she might recognize it. The old woman immediately knew it. It had belonged to someone named Noran. Danya quietly wondered to herself whether this old woman was a family member of the girl who had been manipulated by Arachne. The old woman said she still dreamed about that day. She had watched her sister be killed right in front of her while she remained trapped, powerless, and full of regret. But she said it was all over now. Tears fell from her eyes. She said with certainty that she would never have another bad dream again, and she thanked the otherworld hero from the bottom of her heart. For a brief moment, Shichiku caught a glimpse of the old woman as she must have looked when she was young. It made him blush. The old woman smiled gently at him. Then she said goodbye, and the three of them walked away. As they left, Kira commented that Shichiku apparently had feelings like that too. She admitted she had assumed he was someone who only ever had speedrunning on his mind, but her opinion of him had now changed. Shichiku turned to her and explained in plain terms that what they had just done was a side quest called the Butterfly in the Cobweb. It was a lore-related quest connected to the main story, but it was not required for the true ending. The reward was also nothing impressive, just a single potion. By any reasonable measure, it was not a quest worth going out of the way for. Even so, he had wanted to return the item to the old woman, because it was a precious memento of her late sister. Both Kira and Danya went quiet. Shichika noticed the silence and did not understand why they had stopped talking. The two of them told him not to suddenly say something that made so much sense without any warning. He looked back at them, completely baffled. Later, at the Adventurers Guild, Ida's shield Mirwan turned to Shichiku and asked what exactly he had been thinking. Shichiku responded with a blank and confused sound. Mirwan told him not to respond that way and asked him directly why he had not put in a mercenary request for an S-rank party. She had even been prepared to introduce him to the top-tier S-rank party, known as Silver Dragonfang, so that they could help with the Arachne subjugation. She explained that those party members had actually come and were deeply let down when they found out Shichiku had already gone without them. They had never expected to be left out, and the whole situation had been a lot to deal with. Shichiku apologized, thinking privately that the mercenary system had a very long tutorial. Mirwan then composed herself and, with clear emotion, told Shichiku, Kira, and Danya that she was glad they had all come back safely. Shichiku was taken aback by her sincerity. Mirwan then turned to Kira and apologized for pulling her away on her day off, but explained that following the Arachne subjugation, an urgent questionnaire had arrived from the capital that needed an immediate response. Kira read the envelope and remarked on how quickly those higher-ups had responded, especially considering that the old sages usually struggled to agree on anything. She said she would go write a formal report to the higher authorities. She added that it had been a fun day, even if it was brief, and that she would make sure to cover up what she knew about Shichiku's speedrunning ability, since it would create problems if the old sages found out. Danya responded warmly to this, and the sound of her saying a certain cat-like word made Shichiku blush all over again. Kira then told both Danya and Shichiku to enjoy the rest of their day off. After that, Shichiku and Danya walked outside together. Danya noticed that for once, nobody seemed to be around. It felt strange to both of them. Shichiku also noticed something else. It was the first time the two of them had been alone together since Kira had joined them. He thought about it for a moment, then spoke up. He told Danya that he should have brought it up sooner, but he wanted to apologize for putting her in danger during the fight. He felt that his backup plan had been too narrow, leaving little room for error, and that she had nearly been hurt because of it. Even though he knew that in game terms, damage to an NPC could be healed instantly with a potion, the thought still weighed on him. Danya told him that Kira had arrived just in time, exactly as Shichiku had planned, and that she had come out of it unharmed. There was no reason for him to apologize. When he looked like he was about to argue, she paused and pointed out something she found curious. Despite Shichiku constantly talking about this world as a game, something artificial and constructed, he did not seem capable of actually treating it that way. Shichiku quickly said he had never meant to make fun of her. Danya laughed softly and admitted she was only teasing him a little. She explained that she had gone with him to face Arachne, knowing full well how dangerous it was, because she trusted Kira. And she trusted the hero too. She told him not to betray that trust from now on, and asked him if that was acceptable. Shichiku was visibly caught off guard. Danya laughed again, saying it was funny to hear her call him by his name out loud. He blushed, thinking privately that Shichiku, which essentially meant wage slave, was a sloppy name to be called at a meaningful moment. It could have been his real name, but it wasn't. Danya asked if he was still thinking about something. He said it was nothing. Suddenly, soldiers came rushing toward them from all sides, surrounding them completely. Danya demanded to know what they were doing. One of the soldiers addressed Shichiku, identifying him as the otherworld hero and telling him he had no choice but to come with them to the castle. Shichiku was confused. This was not a story event he recognized from the game. Then someone appeared and told the soldiers to stand down, asking them to stop using such forceful and disrespectful language. That person reminded the soldiers that she was the one who had summoned the hero from another world, and that he was their guest. Ida stepped forward and stood in front of Shichiku. Shichiku stared, confused. He looked over at Danya, standing beside him, and then looked back at the person who had just appeared. He began to wonder if there were somehow two Idas. He looked closely at her face. Ada Re Falschla was the only daughter of King Falschla of the Trueli Kingdom. Ida possessed the strongest holy power of any saintess in recorded history, to such a degree that people spoke of her as someone who had touched the realm of the gods themselves. This was according to the official Another Verse guidebook. That day, at the castle in the capital of Falschla, they made their way to the princess's tower. Ida dismissed the guard at the door, saying that with Danya present, there was no need for one. The guard acknowledged this and stepped away. The two of them then rode something that functioned like an elevator, a device that lifted them through the air. Shichiku's mind was working quickly. Ida and Danya existing at the same time should not have been possible, or rather, it was technically possible, but only as a kind of trick, the sort of thing that could only be pulled off through the stubborn creativity of people who manipulated game clips. Non-player characters could be nudged slightly out of position through attacks, and by repeating this process enough times, it was theoretically possible to move Ida all the way outside the castle, to wherever Danya happened to be standing. And yet Danya had not said a single word this entire time. Shichiku was beginning to genuinely wonder whether he had stumbled into some unknown glitch in the system. Then Danya spoke to Ida directly, telling her she could drop the act. He called her not by her name, but by a different one, Ein. The person wearing Ida's face responded with a light, teasing tone, asking whether the great hero had already known about her older sister. And then, without warning, Ida began to undress. Something resembling inflated padding was tossed into the air. The figure crouched down, now barefoot, and when they straightened up again, the transformation was unmistakable. Ida was a man. He remarked with amusement that Danya really did seem to have a fondness for the hero. Shichiku stood frozen in shock. Before Shichiku could find the words to ask what was happening, Danya stepped in and explained. He told Shichiku that he had probably already pieced it together, but the person standing before them was Ein, Ida's younger brother and her body double. Shichiku could not move. His mind refused to settle. He managed to ask whether Ida was not an only child. Danya seemed genuinely surprised that Shichiku had not known this, and said she had assumed he knew everything there was to know about their world. The gel pads that had given Ein his convincing shape lay discarded on the floor. And the truth was, Shichiku had not known. He knew this world deeply. The NPC count in Another Verse, including background characters, came to exactly 1,063 people. He remembered all of their names, their backstories, their side quests, and movement patterns. Nowhere in that list was there any mention of a body double for Ida, and no character by the name of Ein existed anywhere in his memory. Ein told his older sister that there was no way Shichiku could have known. The hero had come from another world, and Ein himself was someone who was not supposed to exist in the first place. He explained his origins plainly. The previous king, Liandal VIII, Ida's grandfather, had been a man of considerable and indiscriminate appetite. Not content with his relationships among the nobility and common people, he had also become involved with a wandering woman who worked as a prostitute. Ein had been the result of that encounter. Technically speaking, that made him not Ida's younger brother, but her younger uncle. Shichiku thought privately that this was a rather uncomfortable thing to learn about someone upon first meeting them. Ein continued his story without apparent discomfort. His mother had died of illness, and he had never been acknowledged by the royal family. They had seemed content to pretend he did not exist at all, but as anyone could see, he bore an almost perfect resemblance to Ida, and so the royal household had quietly taken him in, putting his face to use as her body double for the times when Ida needed to be in two places at once, traveling as Danya while appearing to remain in the castle as herself. Ein added that if he was going to be playing a passive, background role either way, he would rather do it from inside a castle dressed as a princess than scraping by in the slums. He let out a light laugh as he said it. Shichiku noted with some surprise that despite wearing Ida's face, this body double had a rather sharp and cutting way of speaking. Ein went on to say that the only people who knew of his existence were his older sister, Ida's father the king, and Kira. It was the kind of thing a newly summoned hero from another world should have known, and yet, apparently, did not. Danya remarked quietly that Shichiku was not exactly a typical hero by any measure. Ein asked what she meant by that, but quickly set the question aside, saying this was no time for introductions and getting acquainted. The hero had defeated Arachne within 3 days of being summoned to this world, and Ein intended to have Shichiku tell him everything about how it had happened. Danya looked over at Shichiku. Ein pressed on, saying that while what came next might seem like it had nothing to do with the hero personally, The defeat of the Demon King was not the kind of thing that simply ended there and was forgotten. The subjugation of the Demon King was a matter of enormous weight in royal politics, and what followed it would set many things in motion. The remarkable speed with which the hero had brought about Arachne's defeat was currently causing a stir within both the cabinet and the Wise Sages Congress. Danya remarked that Ein was a sharp and capable young man, handling Ida's duties in her absence as naturally as if they were his own. Ein explained the structure of the Wise Sages Congress for Shichiku's benefit. It was an advisory body that supported the kingdom, functioning somewhat like a parliament, made up of representatives from the 6 great duke families, including the royal family itself. Kira Lachifika's household was one of those 6, though Kira herself was not the representative. Shichiku turned this over in his mind. The Wise Sages Congress had only ever been mentioned by name in the Anotherverse game, never explored in any real depth. From what the fans had pieced together based on what was shown, the Congress lived in fear that the Demon King was too powerful and would strike back against anyone who moved against him, which was why they placed a strict ban on Demon King subjugation and reserved that task exclusively for the hero summoned from another world. Danya observed that the members of the Congress must be feeling a considerable sense of relief now that the matter of Arachne's defeat had been settled. Shichiku thought to himself that this made sense, given that only a small number of people actually knew the Demon King had already been defeated. Ein continued his explanation. The unexpectedly swift subjugation of Arachne had prompted the Wise Sages Congress to immediately demand answers from Guildmaster Kira. Naturally, they would want to understand what lay behind such an unprecedented result. But the Kira they were dealing with was not the sort of person to bow to pressure from the Congress. She would find ways to sidestep the parts that mattered most. Shichiku recalled Kira saying she intended to cover up the truth of his speedrunning abilities, and it was clear that Ein had already seen through that. Ein said that this was precisely why he had brought Shichika here in person. As his older sister stand-in, he wanted to know the full truth, and he wanted it in more detail than anyone else had been given. Danya turned to Shichiku and told him he was free to tell Ein everything, including what Shichiku had done immediately after being summoned to this world. Shichiku understood. Danya warned Ein gently that what he was about to hear was going to sound completely out of the ordinary, and told him to brace himself. Ein said he was ready for that kind of story, and that he would not be caught off guard so easily. He asked them not to underestimate the good judgment of someone who served as Ida's body double. And yet when the truth came out, Ein's expression was anything but composed. He stumbled over his words and asked Shichiku to repeat what he had just said. Shichiku explained again that in his world there existed a kind of competition centered on defeating the Demon King as quickly as possible, known as speedrunning. Ein kept shaking his head, asking over and over why anyone would go straight to the Demon King first of all things. Shichiku clarified that the true ending category of the run required defeating the Elite Four before the Demon King, but that at the time he had been running what was called any percent, which meant taking the most direct route to the end regardless of what was skipped. Ein asked what any of that meant. Danya watched the exchange with quiet interest, noting privately that Ein's reaction was somewhat different from Kira's, which she found rather telling. She told Ein that this was what she had meant when she said the hero was not a normal one. Ein said there had to be a limit to how abnormal a person could be. Surely there was a limit. He admitted that if things were truly as described, anyone would have tried to hide it, Kira most of all, and that made complete sense to him now. Ein confirmed what he had just learned. The only people who knew the Demon King had already been defeated were his older sister, the hero, and Kira. Danya confirmed this, adding that the roots of evil had not yet been fully sealed, and that making it known publicly would only cause pointless confusion at this stage. Ein looked troubled by the weight of it. After a moment, he said that he trusted his older sister's account of things. For the time being, he would do what he could to manage the Congress carefully and keep them from interfering with Danya and the hero's movements. But he made it clear, pointing directly at Shichiku, that he did not yet trust the hero himself, nor did he trust the hero's baffling and unreasonable power. He fixed Shichiku with a serious look and said that as it happened, he had a pressing matter that needed to be dealt with, and he intended to have the hero handle it using that same speedrunning ability. The place in question was the land on the outskirts of the capital that had been under Arachne's control. Now that Arachne was gone, it was unclaimed territory belonging to no one. Ein wanted the hero to rebuild Tadanka village. Danya was visibly surprised to hear this. Ein explained his reasoning. Tadanka village had originally been a thriving and prosperous settlement before it was overrun by Arachne. With Arachne now gone, the land was free, but its position near the capital, combined with the presence of a dungeon in the area, made it highly attractive to exactly the kinds of people and creatures that should not be allowed to settle there. Without something to fill that space, it would become a tempting base for criminals and demons alike. Within 2 or 3 days at most, news of Arachne's defeat would spread across the entire continent. At worst, another powerful demon could move in and claim the area before anyone had a chance to act. Ein wanted to prevent that from happening at the very least. His plan was to set up the most basic and necessary facilities as quickly as possible and get people from the capital to move into the area. This would also help address another pressing problem. The capital had become severely overcrowded with refugees pouring in from all parts of the country. Solving both problems at once made the plan all the more worthwhile. Shichiku shifted restlessly when he heard that speed was a priority. I noted that the hero seemed to have quite a lot of confidence in how fast he could move and suggested a time frame of 2 weeks. Danya reacted with visible concern. Ein said it would not hold up their great hero for too long and asked whether the hero could manage it with speedrunning. Danya pushed back, pointing out that rebuilding a village was typically a process that took a decade, and that in the first place subjugating the Demon King was an entirely different matter for him. But Ein cut her off, saying they would never know unless they tried. In his own mind, however, Ein held a very different view. He knew perfectly well that rebuilding the village in 2 weeks was impossible, and he had never genuinely expected the hero to pull it off from the start. In truth, Ein had already made arrangements and secured the laborers who would be needed for the actual rebuilding effort. His real goal was something else entirely. He wanted to keep the hero in Tadanka village for 2 weeks. During that time, before the official rebuilding team entered the village, the hero would need to hold off the criminals and demons that were sure to start drifting toward the unclaimed land. Ein had originally planned to hire other adventurers for this task, but circumstances had changed. Now he also had another reason to put the hero there. He wanted to observe him closely and take the full measure of his abilities over those 2 weeks. Ein turned to Shichiku and framed it as a challenge. Not one he was making as a stand-in for the princess, but as himself, Ein, speaking plainly. He told Shichiku to simply do his best within the 2 weeks, and that he would not be angry if the hero fell short. He even offered to be gentle about it if things did not go as hoped. Shichiku thought for a moment, and then asked to confirm what the rebuilding would need to include: a surrounding wall for the village, 10 houses, a village town hall, and prepared fields. Ein said that would do for a starting point. Danya thought to herself that even that modest list would normally require months of effort from a full team of workers. She asked Shichiku whether he could actually do it using speedrunning. Shichiku explained that rebuilding the village was a collection of smaller connected tasks in the game, and that while it was not required for the true ending, it could be completed normally by following the 100% speedrun route. After all, speedrunning was not only about defeating the Demon King as fast as possible. That said, it was a different kind of challenge from the Arachne subjugation. He thought it over and said it would probably take around 30 minutes. Ein stared at him. He asked in a sharp and rising voice whether the hero was mocking him. Shichiku was startled. Ein's voice climbed further as he pointed out that this was not cooking. This was a rebuilding of an entire village, a long and painful process that took people decades to restore what had once been lost. Shichiku pointed out, somewhat carefully, that Ein himself had just said 2 weeks. Ein snapped back that yes, he had said 2 weeks, but that was because there was no way the hero could actually do it, and he called Shichiku an idiot for taking it literally. Shichiku simply said yes. Inside, he was thinking that he very much wanted to go home, and that Ein was exactly the kind of overbearing person who enjoyed throwing his weight around. Danya had heard enough. She stood up and told both of them to be quiet. She addressed Ein directly and told him she had no wish to watch him make pointless, heated speeches, and especially not while wearing her face, directed at a hero who was doing his best to save the world. She told him to reflect on his behavior. Ein went quiet immediately and apologized to his sister with genuine guilt written across his face. Shichiku noted privately that Ein was clearly the type who could not hold his ground against his older sister. Danya then turned to Shichiku and asked him to forgive Ein's rudeness. She explained that Ein's suspicion and provocation toward Shichiku came from a place of real concern for her well-being. She also added, without softening it much, that Shichiku himself was not exactly an easy person to place trust in, and that he ought to have at least some awareness of that. Shichiku thought back over everything: the wall clip, the vibrating stunt, the spinning dash, the duplication bug, and quietly agreed that she had a point. Danya told Ein that she knew it was difficult to believe, but that when it came to Shichiku and speedrunning, if Shichiku said he could do something, he genuinely could do it. She asked Ein to set his worries aside. Shichiku might be a little unusual, she said, but he was not a bad person. Danya added one final point with emphasis: that Shichiku simply never stopped being a little strange. Ein took this in and accepted it as the most honest summary of the situation. Later that night, Shichiku announced that he would head into Tadanka village the following morning, and that if things went as he expected, he would be finished before noon. Ein told him plainly that he still had not come around to trusting him. Shichiku suggested that Ein come and watch for himself, since seeing it firsthand would be more convincing than any explanation. Ein said he had a Congress meeting the next day regarding the Arachne subjugation, and that his schedule was far too full for that kind of thing. He reminded Shichiku not to underestimate how demanding the role of princess was. That said, if time allowed, he might come by in the afternoon to check on things. He told Shichiku to do his best out there. The two of them then rode the floating elevator-like machine back down together. Shichiku let his thoughts drift as they descended. Ein was an NPC who did not exist anywhere in another verse. Ida's body double, hidden from the game entirely. But if he stepped back and thought of this world not as a game, but as a real place, then it would actually make more sense that someone like Ein would exist quietly in the background. He could not dismiss any of them as artificial constructs. There was something unmistakably human in the way they were connected to each other as a family. From the moment he had arrived, Danya and Kira had felt to him like real people made of flesh and blood. Even though another verse had always been praised for how lifelike its characters felt, what he was experiencing now was something else. It was like being shown the hidden parts of the world that the game had never depicted. For someone as deeply devoted to another verse as he was, this was the highest form of joy imaginable. An was not a character who did not exist in another verse, Shichika thought. He was simply one who never appeared. There was a difference. He turned this over carefully in his mind. A speedrun route was built by identifying and making the most of every known element in a game. If unknown elements were present, the route he had been relying on might no longer hold up the way he expected. Unknown elements were the greatest threat a speedrun could face. Danya noticed that something had shifted in his expression and asked what was wrong. Shichiku looked at her. He reasoned to himself that it was probably too late to worry about it now, in any case. The fact that Danya could speak to him freely was already an irregularity in itself, something that should not have been possible, and was not speedrunning, at its heart, about adapting to the unexpected. He told Danya that he was simply hoping things would go smoothly during his run the next day. Danya asked what he meant by hoping. At the same time, out on the outskirts of what had once been Tadanka village, a group was already at work. Goblins had appeared in the area, and Eliha stepped forward and called out the name of her spell. Fire surged from her and engulfed the goblins in an instant. Behind her stood the silver dragon Fong. She was accompanied by Mashimu and Little. Eliha remarked that the number of monsters in the surrounding area had been going down steadily and that their efforts to drive them back were clearly working. It seemed they were managing to meet Ida's expectations without any serious trouble. Mashimu mentioned that a letter had just arrived from Ida herself, informing them that the hero from another world would be coming to the area the following day. Eliha found this difficult to take in. She asked whether the hero had truly defeated Arachne. It had only been 3 days since he was summoned. After all, even accounting for Kira of the Lechifica house being involved, the whole thing seemed too strange to accept. She found herself wondering what kind of method the hero had used and concluded that it must have involved some form of magic unique to someone from another world. Their instructions from Ida were to assist the hero in rebuilding Tadanka village and to send back a thorough and detailed account of everything the hero did. It felt less like a request for help and more like an investigation. Ida, it seemed, was very interested in this hero indeed. Mashimu said that whatever the case, the first thing they needed to do when they met the hero tomorrow was apologize for having assumed, given how recently he had been summoned, that he would be little more than an untested newcomer. Eliha smiled at this. Little gave a quiet nod of agreement. Then Little went very still. Something had caught his attention. He growled and said there was a powerful demon nearby. Eliha and Mashimu both reacted with alarm. Little activated his skill, Wolf's Reveal, which allowed him to perceive everything around him even in the dark of night. Both he and Mashimu shifted into a state of sharp readiness. A slime was moving toward them. Before Mashimu had even fully registered what it was, the creature had already slipped past him. In an instant, Little's upper body was simply gone. Mashimu cried out his name, his eyes going wide with horror. The slime spoke in a calm and almost casual tone, musing that the taste was that of a silver wolf, possibly an endangered species, if it remembered correctly. It said it had eaten quite a lot of that in its time. Then the slime shifted and took on a different shape, forming itself into a figure named Raspy, who asked cheerfully whether it had guessed right. It did not notice the attack coming until it was already too late. A blade came down and sliced through its arm. Raspy looked at the arm, then looked at Mashimu. Mashimu muttered quietly that he had missed the core. He had been counting on the fact that a slime's movements tended to slow down right after it consumed something. He admitted under his breath that even he had not managed to stay as composed as he would have liked in that moment. Raspy regenerated the lost arm without any apparent difficulty and regarded them with something between amusement and contempt, making a show of how frightened he was, though clearly he was not frightened at all. Raspy told Mashimu not to take it personally just because he had eaten his pet dog. Mashimu told him to be quiet. He stepped forward, and Eliha called out to him with concern. Mashimu told her he was fine and made her an offer. He would buy her whatever she wanted afterward, even that fashionable lipstick she had been after. All he asked in return was that she give him 200 years' worth of her mana. Eliha replied that even if he bought up every cosmetic product on the entire continent, it would still not quite be worth that price. But as she said it, she was already thinking it through on her own terms. Little, the legendary beastman, a silver wolf, had been cut down in a single instant. Whatever this creature was, it was without question on the level of the Elite Four. Eliha made her decision. She drew her blade across her wrist. In her mind, she had been building up ancient rune energy for 1,000 years. She had not unleashed her full power in 200 years. For Mashimu, she would give her left hand. She told Raspy that they had kept him waiting long enough. Mana poured off both of them as Eliha and Mashimu advanced together. Mashimu announced that it was time for a special lesson in discipline, and that the price of tuition would be Raspy's life. But that was not how things ended up. Later, Raspy sat stretched out lazily in front of a small campfire, rubbing his stomach with satisfaction. He had eaten well. He had expected Mashimu to show him something truly worth seeing, But in the end, the man had simply been a person possessed by an evil dragon. Letting Mashimu land a cut on him had been a waste. A large-scale release of built-up mana? Dull. Not a single new idea in it. A silver wolf? Pathetic. Outrageous, even. Everything that had happened was something he had already seen and already knew. This world was growing stale. There was nothing left in it that surprised him. It was, simply put, boring. Raspy muttered to himself that the real trend these days was people crossing over from other worlds entirely. Then something caught his eye. He looked down and noticed a scroll lying nearby. He recognized the seal on it immediately, a royal crest. His eyes lit up with sudden and genuine interest. The scroll told him what he wanted to know. He and a hero from another world were finally going to meet. He smiled to himself and made a silent vow. He would pick apart everything the Silver Dragon Fong party knew about the hero and whatever unknown secrets surrounded him. And when the time came, he would taste the hero himself, all the way down to the marrow. Kira found out that Shichiku had already met Ain. She shared that Ain had been trying to contact her even before he had seen her report, which struck her as the move of a crafty child. Shichiku took note of this while his attention drifted back to Kira and her bikini armor. He found himself wondering whether she and Ain were on bad terms with each other. Kira explained that it was neither good nor bad between them. Ain was quite a contrary person by nature, and she believed it had something to do with how he was raised. He did not open his heart easily to anyone, and testing Shichiku the way he had was entirely in keeping with who Ain was. As far as Kira knew, the only person Ain had ever truly opened up to was Ida. Danya then offered her own thought on the matter, saying she believed Ain actually liked Kira. Kira seemed genuinely surprised by this, and asked if that was really the case, pointing out that Ain always looked downward when around her and never once made eye contact. Shichiku sat with that for a moment. Here were NPCs he was familiar with, talking casually about an NPC he had never encountered before. It was a strange feeling being on the outside of a conversation like that, as though he did not quite belong. Before he could dwell on it further, someone waved in their direction. Mashimu greeted Kira and the hero warmly, and welcomed them to Tadanka village. Later, gathered inside a tent, Mashimu made his introductions properly. He presented the Silver Dragon Fong, an S-rank party affiliated with the guild known as Dragonbone Sight. Dragonbone Sight was the guild of the primeval forest of Dragon Bones, located in the southern part of the kingdom. Mashimu was the leader, a gladiator by class. He then introduced the other two members of his party, Elaha and Little. He went on to explain that they had come to assist the otherworld hero, who had been personally appointed by Ida herself. They were there to help with whatever the hero might need, including demon extermination. They were fully at the hero's service. Kira quietly registered this in her mind. So these were Ain's observers. Kira introduced herself in turn and showed her crest, making it clear that she was the guild master of Shield of Ada, and therefore simply another adventurer. She told them there was no need to treat her with the kind of formal courtesy one might show a noble. Mashimu responded that this was actually a relief to hear, since he was not particularly skilled with royal etiquette. Shichiku thought about the Silver Dragon Fong. The party consisted of Mashimu, Elaha, and Little, and he remembered them from Anverse as mercenaries that could be summoned during battle. This was the first time he had ever seen them speak or carry themselves like real people, since in the game he had only ever known their names and techniques. Still, he felt a quiet sense of relief. These were at least NPCs he recognized, unlike Ain. Mashimu looked over at Shichiku. Inside him, Raspy was barely containing his excitement at finally being face-to-face with the otherworld hero. He noticed the wooden stick right away and confirmed to himself that it was real. Raspy was a high-grade slime, and his special ability was called Brain Gourmand. By eating a target's brain, he was able to absorb all of their memories and make them entirely his own. He had already perfectly devoured the three members of the Silver Dragon Fong, and none of the others had suspected a thing. The otherworld hero had a strange and powerful skill, and even though Raspy could simply settle for taking the wooden stick, he wanted everything. A meal like this came along only once in 1,000 years. It would be a terrible waste to consume the hero too quickly. Kira remarked that the Silver Dragon Fong had a well-earned reputation, and that having them along was genuinely reassuring. She then moved on to her own introductions. She presented Shichiku as the otherworld hero, someone Ida herself had summoned just a few days prior. When she turned to Danya, Danya introduced herself as Danya the Cat Mage, describing herself as Ida's favorite reliable kitty, and ended with a Naya. Shichiku heard the Naya again and took it in stride. Little let out a low growl. Elaha interpreted this for the group, explaining that Little was simply expressing jealousy that Danya could speak the human language so fluently. She called Danya a cute and clever kitty. Shichiku remembered then that the three adventurers had no idea who Danya really was. She was perfectly fine in her Ida mode presentation, and being the way she was came naturally to her in this context. The thought of Danya being her usual self gave him a quiet, familiar sense of comfort, like something from home. Then someone called out to Shichiku. Ella had said she had heard the rumors about his Arachne subjugation and wanted to know what kind of miracle or technique he had used. Shichiku felt his face go a little red and explained that he had simply done what he always did, which was speedrun the situation. Ella did not quite follow what that meant and asked him to explain further. Before Kira could say anything more, Elaha cut in and declared that it sounded fascinating. She asked if that was the name of the hero's magic. She then shared that the reason she had set out on her journey in the first place was to master magic and to get to the truth behind all things. If she could learn this speedrunning the way the hero used it, she felt she might actually get closer to that wish. Elaha reached out and took Shichiku's hand in hers, asking him directly to teach her. Kira's expression darkened as she looked at Elaha. Raspy noted to himself that human males were weak to that sort of thing. Shichiku, caught up in the moment, confirmed to Elaha that she wanted him to teach her everything about speedrunning. He grasped her hand and told her with great enthusiasm that he would do exactly that, from the routes to the glitches and all of it in between. They would speedrun and verse together. Kira was visibly shocked. She pulled Shichiku aside and demanded to know what he was thinking. He had barely just met this person, and revealing everything so easily was not a wise move. She told him flatly that she had misjudged him, and asked whether he was truly only acting this way because there was a beautiful woman in front of him. Shichiku had no idea what Kira was talking about. To him, Elaha was simply a newcomer to Anverse speedrunning, and, as a hardcore player, he had a responsibility to treat beginners the right way. Kira pressed him on this, genuinely not understanding. Shichiku had already explained something like this to Danya before, but he went through it again. The speedrunning routes and guides for Anverse were not something he had created on his own. Across the world, there were roughly 500 Anverse speedrunners in total. These runners constantly shared information with one another about the glitches they discovered, and every route that existed was the result of that shared competition for the fastest possible time. It was not an exaggeration to call it the collective fruit of human wisdom. But years had passed since Anverse first released, and truly new glitch discoveries were becoming rare. Because of this, the speedrunning routes had grown increasingly strict and narrow. Kira asked what he meant by that, and Shichiku explained further. When there were no new discoveries to work with, speedrunning became a matter of tracing the same existing route over and over again with as few mistakes as possible. There was very little room to save time, and running like that was not particularly good for one's mental health, even if it had its own kind of satisfaction. Kira then asked, with genuine curiosity, whether speedrunning was something that existed as a game in his world. Shichiku turned to look at Elaha and explained that this was precisely why a new perspective was so important. What speedrunning communities needed was an influx of newcomers. Among the experts alone, there was a real risk of eventually hitting a wall and running out of ideas. With more runners, the chances of someone stumbling onto a new discovery went up simply by the numbers. He pointed out that the person who had discovered the Arachne wall clip used in the current any% route had only been running for 2 weeks at a time. That person was Anverse any% Japan 4th place holder, Sadajin Suzin, who had more or less accidentally clipped through the wall there and gone straight to the final boss. The influx of newcomers was the golden key to finding faster routes. It was why Shichiku genuinely believed in supporting beginners with care and respect. He meant this seriously enough that even when Anverse any% world 2nd place, Kinatama Tikoku, had asked him to provide guidance at an event, Shichiku had patiently taught him everything about the ins and outs of Anverse, despite how intimidating the man was. Kira said she understood now and offered a quiet apology. Raspy, listening to all of this, turned the idea of speedrunning over in his mind. If it was something anyone could pick up with just a little learning, then it would be trivially easy to master once he had eaten the hero's brain. The thought made him want to see Shichiku speedrun live. Without warning, Danya came up from behind and punched Shichiku. She told him to save that kind of enthusiastic solicitation for his own world. Shichiku agreed and quietly acknowledged to himself that he had gotten completely carried away talking about speedrunning. He resolved to reflect on that. He called out to Kira and made a point of clarifying something. The rebuilding speedrun route was essentially unrelated to the true ending of Anverse, which meant there would be no real harm in others knowing about it. Kira asked if that was truly the case. Shichiku confirmed it was, and declared that they should strike while the iron was hot and begin the rebuilding speedrun right away. Raspis' spirits lifted immediately. Danya told Shichiku to wait, reminding him that there was something they needed to do before any of that could begin. Together, the group made their way into the village. They set flowers down on the ground. Danya stood and looked at them quietly. Everyone bowed their heads and prayed for those who had passed. They offered their words to the innocent and pitiful souls lost, asking that they find eternal healing in the embrace of the merciful goddess, and that those souls be blessed. When Shichiku opened his eyes, Mashimu remarked that Danya spoke the human language remarkably well. Danya replied that the words were a requiem she had learned from Ida herself, so naturally she knew them well. Shichiku announced that they would begin right away, starting with something he had purchased back at the capital. Kira stared at him in bewilderment. Shichiku reached into his belongings and produced a frying pan, declaring that the rebuilding speedrun of Tadanka village had officially begun. Timer starting now. Everyone present stared at him, completely baffled by the sight of the hero holding a frying pan. Deep within the dungeons of Falschla, evil spirits gathered together in the darkest parts of its depths. Branches thick with miasma spread outward from the roots of evil itself. The miasma, there was so powerful and dense that any monster defeated inside would rise again one full day after its death. That was an excerpt taken directly from the Another Verse official guidebook. Later, the group arrived at the first underground floor of the Falschla dungeons at 1 minute and 15 seconds into their run. Shichiku laid out the core idea behind the rebuilding speedrun. The key to it was gathering materials from the dungeon nearest to the village. For the time being, their focus would be on defeating monsters in order to collect the items they dropped. Mashimu said he understood. Inside him, however, Raspy found a whole thing a little underwhelming. Without warning, a monster appeared in front of them. It was a frogman. Raspy quietly recognized the problem this created for him. If he did not fight, the others would start to suspect something. The silver dragon Fong moved forward and engaged the monster. But Shichiku, Danya, and Kira simply ran past without stopping. Shichiku called back as they moved that this dungeon had one mini-boss every 5 floors, and the one they needed was at the 5th underground floor. Every other monster between here and there was a waste of time, so they would be ignoring all of them. Raspy understood, then, that this had been the strategy from the very beginning. Kira noted that Shichiku had done this same thing once before, the day before yesterday. Danya added that it was a great deal easier to deal with compared to those spiders. At 2 minutes and 4 seconds, they reached the 5th underground floor. Waiting there was a stone golem. Shichiku pointed it out as their main target. It was enormous, with high defense and a great deal of HP, making it a genuinely difficult challenge for anyone who was not prepared. He then raised his stick and struck the golem once. That single hit was all it took. The sub-quest, Falschla Dungeon, the stone giant was cleared. Raspy stared at the wooden stick in quiet amazement. Shichiku explained that defeating the stone golem had rewarded them with 12 stones. He then noticed that an adamantine flower had also dropped alongside them. The random number generator seemed to be in a generous mood today. In total, they would need 180 stones to reconstruct both the curtain wall and the village housing. If stones were all they needed, they could simply use the duplication bug to multiply them. However, this run required them to obtain 3 additional types of random drop items as well, so they would keep defeating the stone golem until they had everything. Kira pointed out the obvious problem with this, which was that the stone golem had just been defeated. Danya clarified that no matter how thick the miasma was inside a dungeon, a defeated monster would not revive until the following day at the very earliest. This, Shichiku announced, was exactly where the frying pan became important. He told them they would head back up to the 4th underground floor for now. When they arrived at the 4th floor near the stairway, there was a treasure chest stocked with healing items and a hearth set up for cooking. Shichiku noted that this kind of recovery area appearing right before a boss fight was something that showed up often in games. This was where they would use the frying pan. Raspy wondered privately, in a half-joking way, why a convenient spot like this would exist in a dungeon at all. Elaha offered the thought that perhaps it was simply because one could not be expected to fight well on an empty stomach. Shichiku held up the frying pan and corrected her. That was not it. What he was going to do was lag the entire system by rapidly and repeatedly equipping and unequipping the frying pan in quick succession. All 3 members of the Silver Dragon Fong went rigid with shock. Kira and Danya both looked deeply uncomfortable. Shichiku stopped and announced that it had worked. They had now achieved a state in which the frying pan was simultaneously both equipped and not equipped at the same time. They were in a superposition state. Kira asked what that actually meant in practice. Danya followed up by asking how it was different from the duplication bug he had shown them before. Shichiku explained the distinction. The cooking command in the game normally only allowed a player to cook food items. But in this superposition state, the impossible became possible. Specifically, they could now cook gold coins. The others stared at him with deeply uncertain expressions as Shichiku proceeded to make a stir-fried gold coin dish garnished with vegetables. Kira and Danya watched in open disbelief as he stood there cooking actual coins in a frying pan. Raspy wondered to himself whether any of this had some connection to that old woman, Arachne. Shichiku continued cooking without pause. After a moment, he announced that it was done. Object number 151. The bug meal object number 151 was now complete. Its description showed no image. Kira and Danya stood there in silence, understanding none of what they had just witnessed. Raspy was stunned. Kira asked Shichiku to explain what was happening. Shichiku laid it out carefully. Unused data that had existed during a game's development but had not been carried over into the finished product was called a debug item. If erased carelessly, it had the potential to trigger entirely new bugs. The error message that appeared was likely there because the graphics for the item had never been finalized or decided upon during development. Danya asked about the error message specifically. Shichiku pointed out that since it was technically classified as a meal, they could of course eat it, and he demonstrated this by doing exactly that. Kira reacted with alarm. Danya shouted at him to spit out immediately. Both of them froze in place as Shichiku swallowed it down completely. He then headed back toward the 5th underground floor, and when they arrived, everyone was startled to find that the golems had already returned. Shichiku explained what had happened. Object number 151 did not advance the in-game timer in any measurable way. However, Volunteer analysis by the speedrunning community had revealed that eating it caused exactly one full day to pass within the game's internal system. Because it had never been properly implemented into the game, there was no way to know what object number 151 had originally been intended for during development. What the community did know was that eating it caused 1 day's worth of time to pass without the game's visible timer moving forward at all. For this reason, it had been given the name the meal that leaps through time within Anverse speedrunning circles. The time check at that moment read 3 minutes and 16 seconds. Shichiku continued his explanation. Thanks to the meal that leaps through time, they were now able to hunt golems as many times as they wanted within a single real-time day. They would keep repeating the loop until they had gathered all the stones and drop items they needed. Ideally, he estimated finishing the whole thing in around 15 loops. Eliha quietly told Kira that she did not really follow the meaning behind Shichiku's explanation. Kira replied that neither did they, not really. She suspected that Shichiku had not actually been explaining it to them specifically. He was simply talking through his speedrunning process out loud. Raspy observed to himself that the otherworld hero had quite a talent for monologuing. 16 minutes later, they had accumulated 216 stones, along with a dragon claw opal, a silver fluorite, a dwarven dice, and an adamantine flower. Shichiku announced that all the necessary materials had been gathered after 18 loops in total. The next step was to return to the village using Matatabi travel, and he asked Danya to handle it. Danya agreed without hesitation, pulling out her Matatabi item. She gave it a rattle and called out the name of their destination, Tadanka Village, and they vanished. At 19 minutes and 53 seconds, they were back in Tadanka Village. Shichiku stated that the next task was to place the stones in the material yard. With all the raw materials now secure from the dungeon, what they needed from this point on was manpower. He asked Danya to use the Matatabi again to travel to the capital. Danya agreed. Raspy was caught completely off guard. Using Mashima's body, he attempted to object and suggested that they stay behind to keep watch over the materials. But Danya had already rattled the teleportation item and called out their destination, the capital Falschla. They shot upward and began moving swiftly toward the capital. But as they approached its barrier, something repelled him. One of the guards heard a sound. A moment later, there was a loud splash, and the guard found himself engulfed by a slime. The slime then shifted and reformed, taking on its true shape as Raspy. Raspy cursed the barrier bitterly. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild Shield of Ida, Kira looked around and wondered where the other three had gone. Danya called over to her, warning that Shichiku would go on ahead without them if they did not hurry. Kira thought about the other three who had teleported along with them and found herself uncertain of their whereabouts. At 20 minutes and 58 seconds, they arrived at the Carpenters Guild, known as the Gnome Group. Inside, a gnome was already cursing loudly. This was Baron May, the chief of the Gnome Group and one of the leaders of the 5 great guilds. Baron was livid. He could not believe the hero had simply walked in like that and asked to borrow his people. He told Shichiku not to be ridiculous and cursed again for good measure. He explained with great indignation that his workshop staff were all first-rate craftsmen. The capital's town walls had been built by the Gnome Group. Even the overnight castle at Falschla was an achievement from 2 generations before him. They only accepted work that met the highest standard, and there was absolutely no way he would take a request from a lanky human idiot like Shichiku. He told Shichiku plainly not to come back. Shichiku listened to the entire tirade and noted privately that while Baron talked for quite a long time, it was at least helpful that he spoke quickly. He then calmly asked Baron what it would take for Baron to acknowledge him as first-rate. Baron cursed at him again and told him to use his head and figure it out himself. If Shichiku was truly an adventurer, then a reasonable starting point would be bringing Baron some rare items. Baron told Shichiku that if he truly wanted to make a request, he should start by bringing him an adamantine flower or 2. Shichiku handed one over immediately. Baron was quietly taken aback. An adamantine flower could only be obtained in this area from inside the dungeon, which meant this person was not entirely without skill. He told Shichiku that he had some nerve, but that a truly first-rate adventurer would be able to bring him at least some dwarven dice as well. Shichiku handed those over too. Baron then asked for silver fluorite, and Shichiku gave it to him. He asked for a dragon claw opal next, and Shichiku placed that in his hands as well. Baron stood there for a moment, genuinely unsettled. Shichiku had produced each item before Baron had even fully finished saying what he wanted. The thought crossed Baron's mind that Shichiku might be able to read minds. He then wondered, with a growing sense of unease, whether Shichiku had somehow figured out that gnomes tended to bluster and bluff in front of humans out of a deep-seated fear of being looked down upon. The thought that they might have been found out rattled him. Baron muttered something under his breath, and when Shichiku asked him to clarify, Baron stated plainly that he was saying he approved of Shichiku. Whatever this Tadanka village business was, Shichiku could take the gnomes there. He called Shichiku a thief and a kidnapper as he said it, but the approval stood. With that, the subquest, known as Stubborn Man, was cleared. At 23 minutes and 3 seconds, Shichiku announced that they had successfully made a construction request to the carpenters of the Gnome Group. The golem loops they had run earlier had been specifically for gathering the items needed to clear the chief's quest. He told Danya it was time to return to Tadanka village. Danya remarked that he was certainly in a hurry. They teleported. When they arrived back at Tadanka village, Kira's eyes went wide. At 23 minutes and 40 seconds, the foundations of multiple structures had already been laid out. Kira could not understand it. They had just been there. Danya asked why there was already a frame standing. Shichiku explained that all they had done was set the flag for the gnome group to go there, and the materials had already been placed beforehand. When a map was loaded through Matatabi travel, any construction that was in progress would appear already underway. Since the curtain walls, the houses, and the village town hall were all being handled by the gnomes, Shichiku turned his attention to preparing the fields himself. He retrieved a farmer's hoe from the ruins of the village and got to work. As he hoed the ground, he explained what he was doing. The method was extremely simple on the surface. He plowed the earth while moving sideways in a steady rhythm, one step at a time, back and forth repeatedly. What looked like plain manual labor was actually something more deliberate. By doing it this way, he was cutting unnecessary frames from the animations. Each small repetition saved a small amount of time, and those savings added up. This was one of the areas where a skilled runner could genuinely demonstrate their ability in a full 100% speedrun. Kira responded that after everything strange they had seen, it was at least a relief to watch Shichiku doing something that looked completely normal. Danya told Kira to get a hold of herself and pointed out that Kira had been so worn down by everything that she had started to think this was ordinary. It was not. Mashimu and the others arrived and called out to Kira and Danya. Danya asked where they had been. Mashimu explained that there had been some goblins loitering around the outskirts of the village, and they had dealt with them. Kira simply watched them quietly. Mashimu then looked around and noted with amazement that they had only taken their eyes off the village for a short while, and it had already transformed into something remarkable. Danya was about to respond when Shichiku announced that he had finished preparing the fields. All that remained now was to wait for the gnomes to complete their work. At 27 minutes and 2 seconds, Danya reminded Shichiku that the village restoration speedrun had a 30-minute target. No matter how she looked at it, finishing everything in the 3 minutes that remained seemed completely out of reach. Shichiku asked her if she had forgotten something, then reached into his belongings and pulled out the no-image item. Danya stared at it in shock. He explained that he had made a few extra of them earlier. Both Danya and Kira reacted with alarm as he began eating it without hesitation. Everything went dark. Shichiku noted calmly that because there were many new objects to load, the loading took a brief moment. Then, instantly, the subquest for Tadanka village restoration was completed. The time read 28 minutes and 37 seconds. Every member of the party, including Kira and Danya, stood with their mouths open. Shichiku called a stop on the Tadanka village restoration speedrun. Kira could only murmur that it was impossible. Danya pointed out that the gnomes all looked completely exhausted. Shichiku moved into his post-run thoughts. A time of 28 minutes was a strong result compared to their initial estimate of 30 minutes. The reason the run had gone so well came down to a few things. The item drops had been favorable. They had managed to stop at exactly 18 stone golem loops without needing to push further, and they had not been forced to fight the random number generator too much overall. Raspy, watching all of this, finally understood what speedrunning truly was. He turned the situation over in his mind, uncertain of what to do next. He could not hold himself back any longer. Wearing Elaha's form, Raspy looked at Shichiku with barely concealed hunger as Shichiku continued his explanation. If there was anything left to improve upon, he said, it would be the timing of when they lagged the system using the frying pan. At the royal castle, roughly 2 kilometers away from Tadanka village, Ein raised his binoculars and looked out. What he saw stopped him cold. The sight before his eyes was nothing short of extraordinary. The guard standing beside him stepped forward. Ein told him without hesitation to prepare a carriage to Tadanka village as quickly as possible. The guard respectfully pointed out that the princess had a meeting with a wise sage's congress scheduled for the afternoon. Ein told him to postpone it. Most of what needed to be covered had already been handled in the morning. He then told the guard to hurry and also to call the person from that village to come there as well. The guard left to carry out the orders. Ein curled his hand into a fist and muttered quietly to himself that the hero had really done it. Meanwhile, back at Tadanka village, Raspy was barely holding himself together inside Elaha's disguise. The thought of a fresh serving of an otherworld hero was becoming too much to push aside. He reminded himself that this would be the 4th human he would be eating raw in a row, and wondered whether it might actually taste better if he made a confit out of Shichiku instead, given how far things had already come. But then another thought crept in. What if the hero already knew he was there? What if Shichiku's route had already accounted for his presence? Shichiku himself noticed a strange feeling, as though someone was watching him from behind. He turned his head and found Elaha standing there looking startled. She quickly wiped something from the corner of her mouth and asked what the matter was. Shichiku looked at her and asked plainly whether she was really that hungry right now. Elaha flinched at that moment, and spread of food appeared before them. There was Tadanka-style mixed stew, vegetable macaroni gratin, grilled mushrooms with medicinal herbs, a crunchy lettuce sandwich, falschla bison roast, and a forestberry cake. Everyone stared at the table in quiet amazement. Kira asked whether Shichiku had made all of it. He confirmed that he had, using the cooking command. Kira asked cautiously whether it was actually safe to eat. Danya asked more pointedly whether he had used the gold coins again. Shichiku assured them that this was literally just normal food made from normal ingredients. He had bought those supplies to adjust the order of his inventory. It became clear to him that they did not fully trust him yet. The gnomes did not share that hesitation. They jolted forward and began eating with great enthusiasm, visibly delighted by every bite. Danya asked nervously whether the gnomes were going to start vibrating or something after eating it. Shichiku told her firmly that they were not, and asked her to trust him. Raspy exhaled internally. It did not seem like anyone had noticed anything off about him. Kira looked over at Elaha and suggested that they all sit down and eat as well. She took a bite and found the food far more delicious than she had expected, and there was nothing wrong with it at all. Raspy reminded himself that Kira was present. The kingdom's strongest female knight, Kira Lechifica. She was still just a human, but her presence was something to keep in mind. Elaha said that they would be very happy to join. A carriage arrived without warning. Danya and Shichiku went to meet it. When the door opened, it was Ein. Both of them went visibly still with surprise. Ein stepped out and said that the otherworld hero had really done it. Kira watched from where she stood and thought that even Ein had come rushing over in a hurry. She understood completely why. She murmured to herself that Ida was gracing the sight in person, and that it was her deepest pleasure to welcome him. Ein's gaze drifted briefly to Kira's chest. His internal reaction was simple and immediate. Then he composed himself and greeted her properly. Raspy, still wearing Elaha's form, went rigid at the sight of Ein. The realization hit him hard. Ida had come there on purpose. This was not a coincidence. Raspy's expression shifted into a slow grin beneath the surface. Ein walked over to the walls and pressed on them to check their solidity. He noted that they were not papier-mâché. Shichiku confirmed that everything had been properly built by the craftsmen from a gnome group. Ein said that, of course, he had to verify it himself, because houses did not get built at the speed of an overnight castle under normal circumstances. Something about all of this was deeply strange, and it left him genuinely concerned about his elder sister, who had to work alongside Shichiku on a regular basis. Shichiku was taken aback to realize that Ein still did not fully trust him. Ein turned away and closed his eyes. Then, slowly, he lowered his head toward Shichiku. For laying the foundation to reconstruct the village this quickly, he expressed his gratitude directly to the otherworld hero. Shichiku was caught off guard by the gesture and told Ein he was welcome. Ein then added that he was not the only one who had made the trip. He had also brought someone who ought to be there. He gave a signal toward the carriage, and a figure stepped out. It was an old woman. Ein explained that she was someone from Tadanka village. Danya and Shichiku both recognized her immediately. The old woman stepped forward and went still. She looked out at the village around her and noted softly that it was a little different from how she remembered it. But the stone houses, the ones unique to that village, were the same as they had always been. She said it felt somehow like she was standing inside a dream. The old woman turned and looked at the group standing behind Shichiku. She stopped. Her eyes narrowed into a hard stare. Using her innate skill called judgment, she could see through the disguises in front of her and perceive the monster hiding within. She cried out a warning for Shichiku to look behind him. In an instant, all three members of what had appeared to be the silver dragon Fong shed their forms and merged together into Raspy. Kira reacted without a moment's hesitation, grabbing Shichiku and pulling him away as a loud explosion tore through the spot where they had just been standing. A hole opened up in the ground. Raspy looked around in shock to find that no one was there. Then a sword came at him, straight for his eye. Kira slashed him clean in half. But Raspy simply lit up and pulled himself back together, breaking away and fleeing. He cursed as he moved, something about his core. Shichiku and the old woman stood there in stunned silence. Shichiku asked aloud how Raspy of the Elite Four had come to be there. Kira echoed the same shock, asking if this was truly Raspy of the Elite Four. Danya went pale. Ein and the guard beside him were equally shaken. Raspy, for his part, seemed amused to find he was well known and said he was quite flattered by the recognition. Kira's mind was already moving quickly. Raspy, the hungering quagmire. What was the goal here? Revenge for Arachne? Reconnaissance on the otherworld hero? And why was Shichiku not doing anything? She had heard that those Raspy devoured had both their appearance and their memories stolen entirely. She called out to Raspy directly and asked whether he had devoured the silver dragon Fong. Raspy answered simply that he had just been very hungry. To himself, Raspy noted that this cocky and irritating female knight was annoying, but that feisty humans did tend to taste particularly good. He licked his lips and said aloud that with such a dangerous female knight present, he could not enjoy his meal at leisure. So he would settle for taking the stick as a souvenir instead. Kira's expression hardened. Shichiku looked down and realized with a jolt that the wooden stick was no longer on him. Raspy remarked that perhaps it was time to head home, and as he said it, he spat toward Danya and Ein. Kira moved fast and threw herself in front of Danya, shielding her. The attack missed Danya, but in the same moment, Raspy seized hold of Ein. The old woman and Shichiku both reacted with shock. Raspy held Ein firmly and paused briefly to wonder why the female knight had moved to protect the cat rather than the princess, then dismissed the thought entirely. He addressed the otherworld hero directly. He told Shichiku that he had not given up on the main dish just yet, meaning the speedrunning route stored inside Shichiku's brain. Raspy activated his movement magic, opening a black hole, and called out that if the hero wanted his princess returned, he should come to the swamp of starvation. He warned that he might begin eating the princess if Shichiku took too long. Then Raspy vanished. Kira cursed under her breath. Everyone looked upward in the silence that followed. Shichiku stood still and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The Elite Four-member Raspy had come out of the swamp of starvation, stolen his strange rod, and abducted Ein, an NPC who was not supposed to appear in this scenario at all. None of this had ever existed in Amverse. This was entirely outside anything he had known. Danya's voice broke through his thoughts. She told him urgently that they needed to move and go save Ein right away. Ein would be killed if they did not hurry. A different voice cut in. It was Kira. She asked Shichiku to answer her honestly. That attack had been completely outside his expectations, had it not? Shichiku did not answer. Kira pressed on. She said there was no way the Shichiku she knew would lose his composure from a surprise attack like that under normal circumstances, which meant that this confrontation with the slime had not been part of his speedrunning route at all. On top of that, his wooden stick had been taken from him. Was the once-in-a-100-years otherworld hero truly planning to throw his life away, rushing and unprepared? She said they needed to be fully ready before moving, even if that meant taking more time. She paused, then added one more thing. A body double, she said, was meant for exactly a situation like this. Danya's eyes went wide. She looked downward. Shichiku's eyes widened too, and he looked over at Danya. Then he spoke. He acknowledged that Raspy showing up had been entirely outside his expectations. But this was still the Elite Four Raspy that he knew from Amverse. The destination being the swamp of starvation, Raspy's own dwelling, actually brought things back in line with a route he was more familiar with. He believed there was plenty of room to win there, and that Kira's counterattack earlier had already given them a meaningful advantage. Regaining the strange rod would be difficult, but there were other ways to defeat Raspy. He admitted he had shown them something embarrassing earlier, and said he would make up for it with backup strategies. They were going to go save Ein, and they were going to do it at world record pace. Danya was visibly moved. Kira said that was the Shichiku she recognized, but she raised a practical concern. The swamp of starvation was in the south of the continent. To get there, they would have to cross the Dragon's Tail mountain range. Going around it by land alone would take 2 full weeks. The further from the capital they traveled, the larger and more dangerous the monsters became. And even griffins could not fly over the mountain range at that altitude, making an aerial route just as impossible. Shichiku told her there was no need to worry about any of that. There was a glitch that covered exactly this situation, and it played a major role in the full 100% speedrun. By going through the underground world, they could reach the swamp of starvation in just 15 minutes. Kira and Danya's jaws dropped at the words underground world. Stepping through the darkness, Kira found herself wondering how things had come to this. She had told herself she was ready for anything, or at least she had planned to be. But the nerves were still there, quiet and stubborn, and she could not stop thinking about what they were supposed to do next. She did not even fully understand where they were. They were in the underground world now, and that alone felt like enough reason to be uneasy. Only 6 minutes had passed since they had first brought up the underground world. Back then, Kira had pointed out that they could reach their destination in roughly 15 minutes, and that Ein was not in any immediate danger. Shichiku was the one being targeted, after all. There was no reason for the enemy to go out of their way to harm the hostage. But Danya had pushed back on that, raising the possibility that the hostage might not be who the enemy believed her to be. She had then shown them something, a necklace with a twin crystal set inside it. Ein carried the other one. The crystal would shatter the moment the other person's life came to an end. Danya had originally made it as a precaution for herself. The thought that followed was a grim one. If the enemy ever figured out that Ein was not the real Ida, there would be no reason left to keep her alive. That realization had pushed them to move quickly. Kira had agreed they needed to hurry, but she had also stopped to ask a question that had been sitting in the back of her mind. She wanted to know what exactly the underground world was. Danya had answered only that she had a bad feeling about it. Shichiku had gone quiet for a moment before admitting that, of all the routes they had taken so far, this one felt the most dangerous to him. If something went wrong, it would not simply mean their deaths. There was even a risk of crashing the game entirely. Kira had asked what that meant, whether it was something like an impact. Danya had muttered under her breath, half to herself, noting that Shichiku had seemed perfectly cheerful just a moment before. Shichiku had clarified that the worst outcome would only happen if they failed. Even so, the urgency remained. They needed to reach the swamp of starvation before anyone discovered that Ein was a fake. Danya had fallen silent. It was Kira who spoke next, saying there was no reason to hold back. She did not fully understand what crashing the game meant, but she understood the danger well enough. And more than that, she had made up her mind. She was not going to let fear stop her again. Shichiku had taken that as his cue, and they had set off immediately. He had announced it like the start of a race, a speed run to the swamp of starvation, timer running. Danya had told him not to get carried away. Their first stop was the capital, where a slum entrance known as the Rat's Den would be their way in. Below that slum ran an underground waterway, and somewhere within it was an area still under construction. the lowest point in the entire capital, exactly as the name suggested. Both Kira and Danya had held their breath as they took that in. Along the way, Danya noticed a homeless person nearby. Then, at 3 minutes and 8 seconds, Shichiku announced that they had arrived. Kira stopped him before he could go any further. She pointed out that they were supposed to be heading to the swamp of starvation, not wherever they were standing now. Danya echoed the concern, saying she knew she might be repeating herself, but she genuinely was not sure this was the right call. Shichiku explained. The swamp of starvation lay to the south of the capital, past the primeval forest of dragon bones, and just beyond the Dragon's Tail mountain range that rose high along the southern edge of that forest. The mountain range formed a natural wall. Even a long way around was a dangerous road, thick with monsters and no clear safe path. Kira had said that going underground to get past towering peaks seemed like a contradiction. Shichiku had told her that was exactly the point of the underground world. The wall in front of them was the only place in the surrounding area where entry into it was possible. He then announced that he would perform a wall clip. Kira asked what that was. Danya recognized it immediately, asking if it was that thing again. Shichiku told them it was a straightforward one, easy enough for beginners. He walked them through it step by step. First, a wooden box was placed where a chair might normally sit. Then they would sit on the box, face the wall while remaining seated, and simply stand up from that position. Kira went first, and she let out a startled cry as Shichiku vanished right before her eyes. Danya calmly explained that he had passed through to the other side of the wall and that they had to follow. Danya sat down on the box, turned to face the wall, and disappeared just as Shichiku had. Kira stared after her in disbelief. Even Danya had done it without hesitation. With tears threatening to spill from her eyes, Kira sat down on the box and squeezed them shut. She copied what she had seen. When she opened her eyes, everything around them stretched out above her in a way that made no sense. The timer read 4 minutes and 42 seconds. Kira could only stare and ask, in complete bewilderment, what in the world this place was. Shichiku told them that what surrounded them was the world that existed beyond the game's polygons. The space underneath everything, commonly known as the underground world. Kira felt her head spin. The explanation had not made things any clearer to her. Then, without warning, her foot slipped out from under her. Shichiku reacted fast enough to grab her hand before she could fall. She looked down. There was nothing there. After Shichiku pulled her back up, Danya asked if she was all right. Shichiku said it had been close, and then warned them both that the invisible floor of the underground world was not solid throughout. There were gaps scattered across it, and if any of them accidentally stepped into one, they would be locked into a permanent falling state. Falling, in other words, meant death. Both Kira and Danya went still with the weight of that. Shichiku started moving at a run, telling them it was safe to follow directly behind him. He mentioned there was a shortcut not far ahead and asked them to hold on until they reached it. The two girls hesitated. Danya murmured something under her breath, but before she could finish the thought, her own footing gave way. Kira caught her and pulled her back in time. Shichiku apologized. He was realizing that this could not be handled the same way it would in a normal playthrough. He suggested they move together while holding hands, and without waiting for an argument, he took Danya's hand while Danya reached back for Kira's. At 6 minutes and 2 seconds, all three of them were running in a line. Both Kira and Danya were thinking the same thing. This was not the kind of danger either of them had imagined when they agreed to come here. At 8 minutes and 2 seconds, Shichiku announced that they had reached it. The shortcut, a strange current of water, stretched out before them. Kira stared at it and said flatly that water was still water. Danya told her to keep it together. Shichiku explained that the current was the source of the Manga River, which flowed all the way through to the other side of the mountain range. If they let the stream carry them, it would bring them out near the swamp of starvation almost instantly. Kira stumbled over her words. Danya asked outright whether Shichiku was seriously planning for them to jump into it. He told them to stay calm. It would be over very quickly, fast enough that they would reach the other side before drowning became a concern. And beyond that, he said, this was genuinely safer than continuing to walk across the invisible floor with its hidden gaps. Danya pointed out that his understanding of the word safe seemed to be missing something important. Shichiku shifted on his feet and reminded them that they had already lost a significant amount of time. If they did not move now, I would be in danger. Danya muttered that he was playing dirty, and then they jumped. At the southern base of the Dragon's Tail mountain range, a small remote village sat quietly in the landscape. A young girl who had been out with the sheep noticed something strange. 3 people were in the river. She watched them with growing alarm, convinced they were drowning. Back where the current let them out, the 3 of them landed on solid ground. Shichiku announced that they had successfully wall-clipped their way out of the underground world and arrived safely at the southern side of the Dragon's Tail mountain range. The swamp of starvation was only a short distance away now. Kira said she did not even feel like she was still alive. Danya, with a dry edge to her voice, pointed out that it was hard to feel alive when you could not even see the ground you were walking on. Then the girl came running toward them. She called out, asking if they were all right. Kira looked at her and wondered aloud if she lived nearby. Shichiku went rigid. He told them both, in a sharp and urgent tone, to run. To get away from the girl immediately. He told them not to think about it, just run. All three of them broke into a sprint. The girl stood watching them go, confused and a little hurt, wondering what she had done to frighten them. While they ran, Shichiku told them that it had been a very close call, but they were fine now. They had made it through the most dangerous part of the speedrun. Danya looked at him with open bewilderment. Kira asked whether the girl had been like the slime they had encountered before, something that appeared harmless but was not. Shichiku said no. The girl was human, and by all accounts a genuinely kind person. The problem was that they had passed through the mountain range by way of the underground world, which meant they had skipped over a large number of things they were supposed to have gone through in the proper order. In that kind of situation, speaking to the girl, or even reaching what would count as the third paragraph of that encounter, would send the game's flag checker into chaos. Kira asked what he meant. Danya asked him to say it in a way that actually made sense to them. Shichiku did his best to explain. The flags tied to that girl were unusually strict compared to most parts of the game. He had not expected her to appear when she did, since the timing had been different from what he remembered. But if they had stopped and spoken to her, the causality holding the story together would have broken down. The timeline would have unraveled. The game would have crashed, and the world itself would have collapsed with it. Kira and Danya stopped breathing for a moment. Shichiku added, almost to himself, that it was a strange thing to be talking about flag checkers at this stage, given that they had already defeated the final boss. Still, he admitted, he had genuinely felt a chill back there. Kira looked at him with a hard expression. Danya said what she was thinking plainly, that Shichiku had no right to take such dangerous risks so carelessly. The timer reached 12 minutes and 39 seconds. Shichiku said, with reasonable calm, that they were already safe now. Danya was furious. She snapped that being safe now was not any kind of excuse for what he had put them through. Shichiku started to bring up Ain again, pointing out that the urgency was real and that they needed to move quickly if they were going to help her. Kira cut him off before he could finish. She told him in no uncertain terms that using Ain's name was not going to work on her, not after what had just happened. Danya added her own demand, that from this point forward, Shichiku would find them a method that was actually safe, even if it meant sacrificing speed. Somewhere else entirely, the air was thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of bats somewhere in the dark. This was the swamp of starvation. Raspy pulled himself up out of the ground. He looked himself over and announced with satisfaction that he was feeling 100 times better than before. His thoughts turned to the female knight, and his mood soured immediately. She had been deeply irritating. He reminded himself that he would need to collect some black holes as well. Then he turned and walked toward where Ain was being held. He studied Ain for a moment, turning the situation over in his mind. He considered what to do. This was Ida, the saintess of salvation, as far as he was concerned. He had wanted a hostage, and a cute one at that. It would feel satisfying, and she would serve the purpose well enough. He supposed he would have to report all of this to Morphomet eventually. The thought alone was enough to make his mood darken further. That female knight had caused him nothing but trouble. A voice told him flatly that since he had gone and abducted someone on his own, he could deal with the consequences himself. Raspy startled and looked around to find where the voice had come from. The voice told him to look properly and asked who else could possibly be there. Raspy stared at the saintess, thrown off completely. The language coming out of her mouth was nothing like what he would have expected from someone of her reputation. He looked her over carefully, suspicious now, and lifted the hem of the skirt to check. The shock that hit him was immediate. This was a man. Raspy grabbed Ain's face and squished his cheeks, looking back and forth between him and his mental image of the saintess. The resemblance was real, he noted. Was this a body double? It did not feel like magic at work. Ain raised his hand and used his own magic to cut across Raspy's hand, a sharp and clear warning not to touch him. The effort left Ain slumping where he stood. Raspy pulled his hand back, stung. Then he recognized the power that had just been used. It was Falschla's, unmistakably. That meant royal blood did run in this person's veins, whatever else was going on. He reached out and grabbed Ain by the throat. He told him that he was worthless. That pitiful little attack had done nothing at all. And if Ain had simply kept his mouth shut and kept pretending, he never would have been exposed as a body double. That was what a person with any sense would have done. So not only was Ain a fake, his instincts were trash as well. Ain spat at him. Raspy's eyes went wide. Ain looked back at him with a faint, crooked smirk and said that Raspy had him beat in that department. He called him a dumbass. Raspy punched him across the face. Ain's cheek swelled immediately. He slumped, breathing hard, his vision going blurry at the edges. Raspy was quiet for a moment. Then he said the word with cold contempt. Impudent. He thought it through aloud. The otherworld hero would have no reason to come all the way out here for a body double. The real hostage was somewhere else. So there was no point in keeping Ain alive any longer. He would simply kill him, partly because there was no further use for him, and partly because he was annoying. Raspy added, almost as an afterthought, that he might have treated Ain more gently if he had just behaved himself. He did have a pretty face. It was a shame that it was in the state it was in now. Ain's thoughts came slowly, dulled by the pain. So this was really how it ended. He found himself thinking, with a kind of distant and fading humor, that he should have done more while he had the chance, should have been bolder with Kira. But no, he pushed the thought away. This was fine. He had wanted this, in a way. He wanted it to end before Ida arrived. That person had always, but the thought never finished. Something exploded behind Raspy. Raspy spun around in shock. Ein's eyes flew open. The three of them had arrived. The timer read 16 minutes and 52 seconds. Shichiku greeted him casually. Raspy could not process what he was seeing. He had known exactly where the otherworld hero had been just moments ago. How was this possible? How had he gotten here? Ein stared at them, barely able to believe it himself. Even for someone coming to his rescue, that had been absurdly, impossibly fast.